minutes. And Your Honor, if I may, based on how it's going, we have a little bit of a concern about how the time is playing out. And I wanted, if I may, hand up a chart to the court so I can inform the court about this now before it becomes a problem later.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, as we reported to the court before the trial started, the parties have an agreement to split the trial time evenly among the parties. This chart has 3 sections. Let me explain the sections so the court understands what we're presenting to it. The first section is the time used so far, actual time, and that's what I've just reported. The second part is the plaintiff's time remaining in their case in chief. We've estimated these times based in part on what we heard yesterday from the plaintiffs about how much time they would take with their experts, 2 to 3 hours. So with 2 of the experts, we have 3 hours. With 1, we have two hours. We've also added in Mr. Farr's remaining expected time with Dr. Chen. That's 2 hours. Frankly, that's partly 2 hours because Dr. Chen has a tendency to elaborate on his answers in cross, and so we've tried to build in sufficient time to account for that. I want the court to note that based on our estimations, if the trial continues to proceed as it is, the plaintiffs won't be done with their case in chief until sometime on Monday. And so the third block of time is where I think the issue becomes, because if the plaintiff's case in chief goes to Monday, based on what we estimate we need for our trial time, there's 2 things that will happen. Number 1, as the court can see at the very bottom line, the plaintiffs will end up getting a half a day more than the defendants based on these estimates. And we believe that's a problem because we have agreed to split the trial time evenly. Number 2, these estimates assume no time for a rebuttal case by the plaintiffs. So the time that has already been spent with the witnesses so far, based on the witnesses that are coming up for the plaintiffs, is sort of leading to this situation where we end up not getting a half a day of trial time and the plaintiffs don't get a rebuttal case. Now, if the plaintiffs waive a rebuttal, that's up to them, but if the plaintiff's case in chief is done by, say, Friday at noon, then I think this schedule resolves itself. But if it goes into Monday, then we believe this is the situation that's going to creep up. We simply wanted to alert the court to this now because we will ask the court, if it becomes necessary, to enforce the parties' agreement to split the trial time evenly.
That's fine. I don't know if the plaintiffs wish to be heard on this.
Very briefly, Your Honor. First of all, I'll say this is the first that I've seen this document. There was no effort to confer with us before raising it this morning. If there had been, I could easily have explained that much of this is completely wrong. These estimates are not accurate with respect to many of the witnesses, both the estimates of our direct examinations and the estimates for the cross-examinations. It's just all wrong. The only other thing I would say is that based on what Mr. Strack just said, I think that by the time Mr. Farr is done cross-examining Dr. Chen, we will have used 474 minutes and the defendants will have used 516 minutes. So they're using up more of the time in our case in chief than we are, and I don't think that that should prejudice our opportunity to put on our case as we see fit. We will finish by next Friday in the time that is allotted for our side.
I don't really know the specifics of your agreement, but as I understand it, I recognize that you're keeping track of time, but have you also agreed that the plaintiffs will conclude their case under any circumstance by the end of the day Friday?
We have not. What we've agreed is that each side will, by the end of next week, use the same amount of time. We couldn't fairly agree that we would definitely conclude by Friday because we don't know the length of their cross-examination. And as I say, by the end of this witness, they will have used more time in our case in chief than we have used in our case in chief. So at the rate that cross-examinations are going, I don't think that we will finish our case in chief on Friday, that we would certainly have liked to, because it's already an inconvenience for one of our witnesses to be here on Monday, but we will, that's on us, and we'll make do as best we can.
All right. Well, Mr. Strack, it seems like the arrangement is a reasonable arrangement. It's certainly one that I've seen utilized before, and it, of course, requires all parties to judiciously use the time they allot to cross-examination, direct examination. And I understand certain witnesses require more thorough cross-examination, certain witnesses won't, but it seems much of this is in as much control for your parties as it is for the plaintiffs. So I'm not sure how this is a problem that the court needs to get involved in.
Well, it may not. We wanted to highlight it and raise the issue and put our estimates out there. If the estimates turn out to be wrong, they turn out to be wrong. That's fine. But if it's based on what we've heard so far, if these estimates are correct, then by the time we get to Tuesday of next week, we will already be in a situation where we're likely going to be pregnant. So we just wanted to bring that up to the court now. It may not play out that way. And we understand that, but we thought it'd be best just to raise it to the court now, raise it with the plaintiffs now, and then see how it plays out.
Okay. Well, we're certainly glad to hear about the agreement, and we certainly encourage all parties to continue to honor the agreement that you've made. Very good. Any other matters that we need to bring up before we proceed? All right, so we'll ask Dr. Chen to resume his seat. Yeah, that's what was given to me today.
Okay.
Further questions, Mr. Farr?
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Chen, yesterday I heard you refer to the 2018 election as a waived Democratic election.
I think I may have described it as a tied election, something along those lines. I don't recall the specific words.
Okay. Could you turn to your deposition, which I put up there for you before you came? I think it's up at the top somewhere.
Can you tell me which page number you're going to?
I want you to go to page 302. Are you there?
Yes.
So we're going to read from line 5 to line 21, and I'm going to ask the question that I asked you in the deposition. I'd like for you to read the answer. Would that be okay?
Okay, sure.
All right, so beginning at line 5, I asked, yes, I remember the question I wanted to, did you hear the term wave election?
I couldn't give you a precise definition, but I've probably heard it before, maybe referring to somewhat different things, but I've heard the term.
But you don't have an opinion as to what that means.
I don't have my own political science definition of what that term means.
So you wouldn't have an opinion on whether the 2018 was a wave election for Democrats, one way or the other?
You'd have to give me a precise definition of what you mean by wave election, and I could assess it. But it's not something it's not a term that I routinely use.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. Now I want to move to a discussion about county group maps that you testified about where you were identifying recording outliers. Let's start with Plaintiff's Exhibit 45 that will be in your witness notebook document. Oh, sure. Thank you for letting me know. county groups in general. If we look through your report, for set one, you've listed 15 House county groups that you contend show partisan outliers.
I believe that's correct.
And there are a total of
I'm sorry, if I could just go back, and I just want to be more precise. These are county groupings where I find that there are partisan outlier districts.
Okay.
I just wanted to be more precise.
Thank you, that's what I meant to ask you, and I appreciate that clarification. So there are 41 total House groups in the 2017 adopted House plan.
And if you'll just let me flip back in my report to the table where I list them, I'll confirm your number, if you'll just give me a second.
My notes, I say it's on page 1, but I could be wrong.
Page what?
1,
Page 1?
my notes say, but I could be wrong.
It's not on page 1, but I'll find it very quickly.
Okay.
It's on page 13 and 14, and it is indeed 41 House county groupings, or 41 county groupings in the House plan.
Okay, and then we did this at your deposition. And did we not agree that you did not report partisan outliers for 64% of the House groups?
I mean, if you want to point me to where that came up in the deposition, I'm happy to explain or look at that. I just can't specifically remember what exactly you're talking about. I'm happy to look at the deposition if you want to point me to
Look
it.
at page 149, lines 15 through 18.
What's the page number again?
I believe, Dr. Chen, it's page 149.
Sure, and I think there are a couple related questions that you asked me there, but the essence of what I explained across page 149 is I did not produce figures on many of the county groupings that have multiple districts. In many of those county groupings, specifically 23 out of the 28 county groupings in the House plan, but I think 23 out of the 28 House groupings in the House plan that contain multiple districts, I found actually do contain partisan outliers, and I think I summarized that at the bottom of page 149 when I say I'm trying to characterize these properly, is that these are county groupings that contain partisan outlier districts. So I affirmed for you that indeed I did not produce a figure for every single county grouping in the House plan, but I found lots of these county groupings that contain partisan outlier districts.
But you
Again, the House, sorry, I just wanted to finish with just one more sentence and I'll be done.
Okay.
Again, just in the House plan, 23 out of 28 county groupings contain partisan outlier districts.
And where did you say that in your deposition?
Like I said, I don't think I specifically said that. I just kind of summarized it at the bottom of page 149 when I said that, look, a lot of these contain partisan outlier districts.
But you didn't identify that number in your deposition.
I don't recall that.
And the only ones that you reported on in your report were 15 county groupings.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think in the deposition you asked me a question or gave me an opportunity to answer, to give that number, and I'm affirming that in my report, I listed the county groupings that I listed, and I showed the figures that I showed.
But sitting here today, we can't look at your county grouping maps with these other county groups that you didn't report in your report.
Actually, you can. I turned over all the data back on April the 8th. I turned over all of the computer simulated maps for every single one of the 4,000 computer simulated maps in my report. I turned over partisan statistics, all of the partisan calculations using the 10 statewide election composite measure, using those 10 elections that
Statewide election partisan measure.
I'm sorry, I'll start over again, and I apologize. I will do better today. So I turned over all of the partisan calculations using those 10 statewide elections that Representative Lewis laid out in August 2017 that the redistricting committee used. And I turned over all of those partisan calculations in connection with my original April 8th expert report. I identified the county groupings in every plan, the county groupings of every district in every plan. So I turned over all of that data in connection with my original expert report from April the 8th.
But Dr. Chen, you turned over a lot of data with your report, did you not?
I turned over all of the data that was used for my expert report. I mean,
you only decided to report in your report on 15 county groups that had partisan outliers.
in the House plan, I listed out 15 county groupings. That's correct.
Okay. In the Senate plan, there's a total of 29 county groups, is there not?
I'm going to flip to the Senate table, and I'll give you an answer there. So if I'm looking at it correctly, I've got this listed on Table 2, which is page 15 of my original report. There are a total of 29 county groupings, although only 11 of them, of course, have multiple districts that were computer simulated. The 12th was drawn by the special master. So there are only 11 county groupings in the Senate plan that have multiple districts that were computer simulated.
Okay, and in your report, you only listed in your report 7 county groups that you contended in your report that had partisan outliers.
I believe that's correct with respect to my report. All 11 of those county groupings actually produce partisan outlier districts. I believe I listed 7 in those figures, or I produced figures showing 7 of them, breakdowns of 7 of them.
You say you produced figures, Dr. Chen, but you didn't include in your report county group maps showing partisan outliers for more than 7 of the Senate county groups. I'm
affirming for you that I produced figures showing 7, and I think, you know, there's a list of those 7 in my report.
And so the county groups that you reported in your report as having partisan outliers would indicate that you did not show partisan outlier maps in your report for 68% of the county groups.
Again, I turned over all of the data showing all of the partisan calculations for every single district in every single computer simulated plan, and for every single district, I identified the county grouping. The data is what the data is, and you just asked me about partisan outliers, and I'm affirming what I actually showed in my reports.
Okay, I don't think you answered my question. You didn't produce a county grouping map showing partisan outliers for 68% of the county groups in the Senate plan.
I showed it for 7, so I'm affirming that it was 7 figures in the report.
Could you turn to page 151 of your deposition?
Okay.
Could you we can read all the questions if you want to, Dr. Chen, but you look at lines 11 through 14. Isn't that true that in your deposition you admitted that you did not report in your report partisan outliers for 68% of the Senate groups?
No, it looks like in lines 11 to 14, you just asked me to do a math calculation, 7 divided by 22, and I did that calculation for you. I recall that you just put a calculator in front of me.
Okay. So you've got 7 county group maps in your report for the Senate, correct?
No, I mean, I think what you're saying is that there are figures that show the district-by-district breakdown in my original report for 7 of the county groupings.
And so for 22 of the other county groupings, you did not include in your report similar maps. That's a yes or no question.
Well, that's correct. I mean, of course, like I just said, a lot of these county groupings just have a single district. In fact, I mean, I think I told you, only 11 of the Senate county groupings actually have more than one district. The remainder of them are actually one district, or either one district county groupings, or like Cumberland Hoke, I believe, was drawn by the special master.
Okay, let's turn to Exhibit 45, which is your figure 25. I mean, Plans Exhibit 45, which is your figure 25, your original report. You see that? And it's in the witness notebook, Dr. Chen.
Yes, sir, I see it.
Okay. You see at the top where it says 1,000 computer simulated districting plans?
Yes, sir.
So nowhere on this chart did you disclose the number of unique maps that your algorithms have drawn for this particular county group.
Well, you see the district level partisanship numbers, and you could pretty easily see it from that for some of these districts. But obviously, I didn't report the specific number.
Okay, and you didn't report a specific number of unique maps for any of these county group exhibits that you prepared in your report for either the House groups or the Senate groups?
Same answer there. I mean, for some of these county groupings, especially for a lot of the ones with very small population, a relatively small number of VTDs, where naturally we're going to expect that the number of discrete unique county groupings was really small, that information can be, I think, visually gleaned from these figures in some of these really small county groupings. But in general, I didn't specifically write out a number in this figure with that number. That wasn't the point of these figures.
Okay. So you think that somebody could read this report and discern that you didn't really have 1,000 unique maps for the county group involved in Guilford County?
I didn't say that. I just said that reporting that number was not the point of these figures. And I said that for some of the county groupings, we naturally know and expect that in groupings that have a relatively small number of VTDs, we'd expect that the number of unique discrete plans would be so small that that information could easily be gleaned or estimated from just looking at some of these figures.
Do you know how many unique maps you drew for the Guilford County group?
I don't have that information in front of me.
Is that in your data?
I'm sorry.
Would that be in your data?
You could easily take the data, take the computer simulated files, and count that up. You'd have to look through the 1,000 simulated plans for House Simulation Set 1. But in the sense that I turned over all of those maps, you could easily see it from there.
Well, if I could do it, then that means you could have done it also, correct?
I mean, as a technical matter, sure, I could have done it. That was not the point of this figure.
Okay. Now, Dr. Chen, I don't want to have to go back to the special master's report. We will if we need to, which is an exhibit we talked about yesterday. But I'm looking at House District 59. And you used to evaluate the political lean of these districts. I think I recall you used the 2010-2016 composite.
Yes, sir. The same statewide elections that Representative Lewis said the General Assembly was using in August 2017.
Okay. And what's the difference? Well, first of all, what's the Democratic percent for the enacted House District 59?
It appears that it's a little bit above 0.40, so somewhere between 41 to 42% Democratic vote share. I'm sorry, I said a little bit above 0.40. I meant somewhere between 40 to 41% Democratic vote share. I misspoke.
Okay, and what is the Democratic vote share for the lower end of your range for your simulated maps?
It appears that that lower range is around 46%.
So what would the difference be?
You're asking the difference between those two numbers that I just read?
Yes.
That was just something in the ballpark of 5 or 6%.
Okay. And you'll agree that the special master revised House District 59?
Well, the special master made very small changes to the northwest corner of House District 59. The special master was not tasked with redrawing 59. The special master was only tasked with redrawing House District 57. Now, of course, in order to redraw 57, the special master also had to make some changes to the surrounding districts, 61 and 62, and that in turn led the special master to make very small changes, pretty minor changes, to the northwest corner of District 59, right in the northern portion of Guilford County, where it touches 62 and 57. But I just wanted to clarify that the special master was certainly not tasked with redrawing 59.
Okay, but he had to redraw 59 because he redrew 57, is that right?
The special master was not trying to redraw 59. There were incidental changes to the borders where it touches 62 and 57 for things like equalizing population, just to make the districts geographically contiguous. There were very small changes that the special master made in that northwest corner in northern Guilford County.
Okay, so when you say small changes, anywhere in the report, do you analyze the amount of population that was moved by the special master in House District 59?
I mean, that wasn't the point of my report, and so I don't think I reported that. It was a very small fraction of the entire district, a pretty small minority of the entire district. And I mean, if you want to just put the special master report up here in front of me, we'll see how small it is.
Okay, now Dr. Chen, do you remember that the special master was told by the court that he could not consider election results?
I mean, I'm happy to take your word for it. If you want to get out the report and put it in front of me, I'd be happy to.
Okay.
But I'm really just happy to take your word for it.
Okay. Now, in redrawing, will you take my representation that the court adopted the special master's revisions in Guilford County?
Sure.
And the map that you have on Exhibit 45 is the version of Guilford County that includes the special master's districts.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm showing here all 6 districts here in Guilford County.
Okay. Do you have any evidence that the special master?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mr. Farr, but I just wanted to give you a complete answer. Obviously, in this map, I'm showing all 6 districts. In the figure on the top, I am only showing the 3 computer simulated districts. And of course, I've explained to the court how I froze 3 of the districts in this particular county grouping. So I'm sorry about that. I just wanted to clarify.
But you didn't freeze House District 59, which was changed by the special master in your simulated districts.
That is correct. I only froze House Districts 57, 61, and 62.
Now, are you aware of any evidence that the special master or the court decided to draw House District 59 to help Republicans elect a Republican candidate in that district?
I'm not aware, and that's not my conclusion. I wouldn't conclude that from my results here.
Now,
I mean, I'm sorry, let me just finish, give you a more complete answer here, because I think this is responsive. Yeah, the point is that the special master did not draw the entirety of House District 59. The special master, again, made small adjustments to the boundaries in the northwest corner of House District 59. The special master was not wholesale redrawing House District 59. All of these portions to the south, in the southern portion of Guilford County, those are not special master affected areas of House District 59. You can't just look at this district and say because the special master made small adjustments to it, the special master was somehow responsible for the entire District 59, and that somehow that indicates some kind of partisanship on the special master's part.
Dr. Chen, your definition, quote, small adjustments is based upon your examination of physical appearance of the district. Is that right?
Well, I mean,
Is that a yes or no?
I looked at the geography of the district. I don't know if you call it physical appearance. I guess it is, but I looked at the geography of the districts.
You didn't study the population that was moved.
I know that the population that was moved was, and I can't give you the number off the top of my head, but I can, I'm pretty confident saying that it was a very small fraction. It was a minority of the district. It was a small fraction of the district's total population.
But you didn't report that.
No, that wasn't the point of my figure here.
All right, I got one more question about this. So under your simulated maps, if the legislature or if the court imposed one of your simulated maps, the simulated maps would have more Democrat voters than the special master version of HD 59.
Your question is, the simulated map would have more Democratic voters than the current districts. And I'm just going to answer your question literally. The literal answer to your question is, the simulated plan would have the same number of Democratic voters. That was the question that you asked me.
No, I said one of your simulated plans would have more Democratic voters than the special master version of HD 59.
Okay, so which simulated districts are you specifically?
Anyone in the gray line,
Which gray line?
the low end gray line, which we talked about, there was 6% more Democrat
Okay.
than the enacted plan.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification. So you are, as I understand it, you're asking me about the bottom row of this figure.
Right.
And you're specifically talking about the gray bar that's right around, that I had identified as right around 46%.
Right.
And sure, I mean, I'm happy to tell you that that is, your math is basically right, that is a more Democratic set of simulated districts than HD 59. Again, remembering that HD 59 was not redrawn in its entirety by the special master. Only a small portion of the borders were, but certainly we can see that the gray bars are about 5 or 6% more Democratic than the red star indicating HD 59.
And if that simulated map was adopted, that would require the cracking out of the special master's version of HD 59 Republican voters who currently have a chance to elect their candidate of choice.
I'm just going to give the same caveat again. I'm taking issue with your calling it the special master's HD 59 because I've obviously explained what I needed to explain about that. I won't take up your time by repeating it. But sure, I mean, we can see that this district here is more heavily Democratic, in other words, less Republican leaning than the current enacted version of HD 59. I'm just taking issue with your question calling it the special master's district. I've said what I needed to say about HD 59 having only a small portion of its borders adjusted by the special master.
Okay, let's turn to figure 26, which is the next exhibit in your map network, and it's plaintiff's exhibit 46. You see that, Dr. Chen?
I see 46.
Okay, and are you reporting on 6 districts within the county group that includes Cabarrus, Davie, Montgomery, Richmond, Rowan, and Stanley?
Yes, sir, there's 6 districts.
And under all versions of your simulated plans, do those districts remain Republican-leaning districts?
It appears that all 6 rows have computer simulated districts that would be over a 50% Republican vote share or under a 50% Democratic vote share in terms of the 2010 to 16 statewide election composite.
And all 6 of those districts fall within the range of your simulated maps?
Well, certainly they're within the range, but some are certainly outliers. So for example, you look at that second row there, that second row, the enacted district, the second most Democratic district in the enacted House plans version of this county grouping, it's HD 83. That's an extreme partisan outlier. It's more extreme, it's more Republican than 98.4% of the second most Democratic districts in the computer simulated plans. So it is certainly statistically within the range, but it's an extreme partisan outlier. You look at the bottom row, the sixth most Democratic district, and it's not an extreme partisan outlier, but it's a fairly noticeable outlier. That district HD 67 is more Democratic than 88%. But notably, you look at the second row, and that's certainly what I would call a statistical partisan outlier. It's more extreme than 98.4% of its corresponding simulated districts, and so that again was HD 83.
Your Honor, I believe that Dr. Chen explained all this yesterday, and could we get some help here to shorten up this cross-examination to ask him just to answer my question? We went into great length about his definition of partisan outliers yesterday.
Your Honor,
Yes.
Mr. Farr asked Dr. Chen a question specifically about whether these districts are outliers. He has the right to answer the question.
I think I can speak for the three of us that I think we all understand the concepts that he's explaining, and we do not need the concepts repeated, but if the expert feels that he needs to give explanation or qualification, he's allowed to answer fully, but we do understand the concepts that he's explained several times, I think would be fair to say. So we would appreciate more brevity in the responses, but we're not going to impose any limitations on the answers that he feels he needs to give in order to fully answer the question.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Dr. Chen, could you turn to figure 27, which is plaintiff's exhibit 47?
Yes, sir.
And this is your candidate analysis for the Columbus, Pender, and Robinson candidate.
Yes.
Now, I had a couple of questions on this. House District 47 that you had labeled as the most Democratic district.
Yes.
Did you ever study the amount of the Native American population in House District 47?
Okay, and this is the district in Robeson County, right?
Yes.
Okay, yes, I did.
Did you include that in this report?
Nope.
Did you include it in any report?
Nope.
All right. Now, is it fair to say that the least Democratic district is House District 16, which is on the third row?
Yes.
And is it fair to say that House District 16 in the enacted plan falls within the range of your simulated districts?
No.
How far off is it?
Well, I can't give you the precise number, but I mean, visually you can see it's above the entire range. And I did report in the right column that 100% of the corresponding simulated districts are to the left of House District 16.
All right, but it's very close to being within your range.
Like I said, I can't give you the precise number. I mean, I can obviously see that it's just right beside the rightmost end of the gray circle range.
Okay, and if the legislature or the court ordered that the state adopt one of your simulated versions of House District 16, that would result in more Republicans being included in that district. Is that right?
Well, sure. I mean, that would be the case for the third most Democratic district. It would be more Republican. And in turn, the second most Democratic district, you can see that would become significantly more Democratic. In fact, using this measure, most likely the second most Democratic district would actually become an over 50% Democratic district. That's what you can see in the second row of this figure.
Turning back to House District 16, if one of the simulated maps was either adopted or ordered, that would result in Republicans being put into a district, more Republicans being put into a district that's already a Republican district. Is that correct?
I think I just said, yeah, it is. And in turn, with the second most Democratic district, it would become a more Democratic district and over a 50% Democratic district under most simulations.
Okay. Now, for House District 46, your simulated plans resulted in a few versions of that district that would be Republican districts.
Yeah, I can see a small number do. It looks like a vast majority would have been over 50% Democratic vote share under the simulations.
And what's the difference between your projection for the enacted House District 46 and the lower end of your range for simulated districts?
Okay, you're asking what's the difference in the Democratic vote share that I've measured here between HD 46 and the most Republican of the simulated districts?
Yes.
Did I hear you right? Okay. I don't have the precise number, but you can just eyeball it here and see that it might be maybe about 3% or so.
Okay. Now, did you ever compare the political performance of the districts drawn by the, offered by Common Cause that were drawn by law students for this county group? Did you ever compare those districts for this county group to your simulated districts?
Okay, did I compare the Campbell Law students' districts in this county grouping to the computer simulated districts? That's what you were asking. I don't believe so.
Okay. And did you make any comparison, any statewide comparisons between the districts in the Common Cause proposed plans drawn by Campbell Law students to your simulated districts?
I'm sorry, if I could just ask you to repeat. I'm not sure I caught that.
Well, did you ever compare the Common Cause districts? And you're going to want to say drawn by law students, so I understand that. Did you ever compare those districts statewide and their political performance versus the performance of your simulated maps?
Okay, I don't believe that I ever looked at any analysis of the Campbell Law students' districts aside from Dr. Hoffler's Excel sheet in which he presented a, quote, and a partisan breakdown of the, quote, nonpartisan simulation map that the Campbell Law students had drawn. So I looked at that, and that certainly purported to, and did in fact present a partisan breakdown. So I saw those numbers, but aside from that, I don't think I have anything else that's responsive to your question.
Okay. And you did look at the political performance of the maps drawn by the Covington plaintiffs and compare that data to the political performance of your simulated maps?
I don't believe I ever analyzed the partisanship of any Covington plaintiff's map.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you just some general questions about these county groups. Anywhere in your report, do you compare the compactness scores for the enacted districts or the special master districts to the compactness scores for specific districts, Dr. Chen? Do you ever look at the compactness score for a specific district in the enacted plans and compare that to your simulated equivalent districts?
And you're just, did I catch you right? You're just asking about the special master districts?
No. Let's just say the districts used in 2018, which includes the enacted plan and special master districts. So let me ask you a question this way. For the 2018 districts, did you ever look at the compactness score for one of the districts used in 2018 and compare that to a specific district in your simulated plans that corresponds to that district?
Well, no, that wouldn't really make sense. Which specific simulated district are you talking about? If you take one of the enacted districts, there's not going to be, in general, a computer simulated district that's exactly alike to it, unless I froze it, of course. So there's not one that's going to be exactly alike. So what are you going to compare it to? Because that's not how, that just doesn't make sense, because that's not how compactness calculations work. We compare the compactness of entire plans, of all the districts on the plan.
So, but you don't know, you didn't report on the compactness scores of the districts used in 2018?
I did. My report has these measures of the entire compactness of the entire plan. That's how compactness is measured.
Well, that's how you measure it. My question is, did you report on the compactness score of a specific district in the 2018 plan?
Specific district in the 2018?
2018 election districts.
Okay. My report contains only the plan-wide, the statewide measures of REOC and Pulse B Popper. Now, in order to get those calculations, I obviously calculated district by district the REOC and Pulse B Popper scores of every single enacted district and every single computer simulated district, and I turned over all of that data.
But in your report, you didn't compare the average compactness score in one of the enacted county groups versus the average compactness score for your simulated equivalent groups.
Same answer as before, no.
Okay. And so you haven't identified a district in the enacted plan that flipped from being Democrat to Republican because of its compactness?
No, that's not the analysis that I was doing here. I made conclusions plan-wide about those things.
Okay, and so I want to ask you those same questions about split cities and divided VTDs. Did you ever compare the divided cities that exist in one of the enacted county groups and compare that to the divided cities in your simulated equivalent groups?
Same answer as before. I analyze those things statewide, not reporting them on a district level or grouping by grouping level.
Okay, so you can't point to any district that flipped from being Democrat to Republican because of the divided city?
Well, the point is, I just drew these, I was just trying to answer the question plan-wide. I wasn't trying to answer that question, so I didn't try to identify it in that way that you're suggesting.
Okay, and you didn't calculate the number of divided VTDs in one of the enacted county groups and compare that number to the divided VTDs in your simulated county group equivalents?
Same answer as before.
So you can't identify a district that flipped from Democrat to Republican because of the divided VTD?
I never am making the argument that a district is flipping from Democrat to Republican because of a divided VTD. Simply dividing a VTD is not what flips a district from Democrat to Republican. Partisan intent is what flips a district from Democrat to Republican. You can divide VTDs in a nonpartisan manner, and you can divide municipalities in a nonpartisan manner. You can draw non-compact districts in a nonpartisan manner.
Well, Dr. Chen, you don't really know if a district flips from Democrat to Republican until you have an election, right? You can make a prediction, but you don't know whether it's going to flip or not until you have an election.
Well, I mean, I'll just qualify. When I say Democrat, Republican, or Republican district, I'm obviously talking about the 2010 to 2016 statewide election composite measure, which is what I've been using.
Okay.
So that's just what I mean when I say those words.
Let's move to figure 28, which is exhibit 48. And this is the Cumberland County grouping for the House, and you're set number 1. Are you there, Dr. Chen?
I am.
And is it fair to say that your simulated plans result in some of those plans creating districts that would be majority Republican under your index?
Sure, I mean, you can look at the bottom row and you can see that some number, probably over half of the simulated districts in that bottom row are certainly Republican districts. They're not safe Republican, they're not extreme Republican districts. They're basically bare Republican districts that in the Democratic tide year would probably flip over to being Democratic districts. But using this measure, they're certainly slightly Republican leaning districts.
And if you look at where you charted the enacted HD 45, what's the difference between your predicted Democratic vote strength for that district and the lower end of your range of your simulated maps?
Well, it's quite a bit. It's probably about 5% or so to the lower range. You go to the, the entire range, it's probably 5 or 10 to 12%, but looking at the lower range, it looks like maybe about 5%.
Okay, let's turn to Plan Exhibit 49, which is the next map in your notebook. It's figure 29 for your first report. And this is for House simulated set 1 within Forsyth, Yadkin County group. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
And if you look at the chart at the top, you have HD 71 and HD 72 as Democratic districts.
I see that.
And all versions of HD 73 and HD 74 of your simulated maps are also Republican districts.
Okay, I think what you're trying to say is all of the gray circles in the 4th and 5th rows are Republican districts. I wouldn't call them simulated versions of 73 and 74. They're just the kind of the corresponding simulated districts to 73 and 74.
And they're all Republican, right?
Using this measure, they are they all appear to have below a 50% Democratic vote share, so they would be classified as Republican districts.
And House District 73 in this chart falls with your predicted Democratic strength in the enacted HD 75 falls within the range of your simulated versions.
Okay, now you got me confused. Are you talking about the 5th row or the 3rd row where 75 is?
The 3rd row.
Okay, so the 3rd row is where HD 75 is, and you're just asking where HD 75 is within the range of the simulated districts?
Yes.
Okay, so it's an extreme partisan outlier. It is more extreme than 99.5%. It's more Republican than 99.5%. It's barely inside of the range.
All right, let's turn to Figure 30, Exhibit 50. This is your county group map for the Franklin Nash county grouping under House Simulation Set 1, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And is this one of the county groups where you say there's probably a pretty small number of simulated districts?
Yeah, and you can see that from this figure here. I mean, obviously Nash has got to be the one that's divided up into 2 districts. And just because of the way Nash is with a small number of ETDs, there's just going to be a very small, discrete, limited number of ways you can divide that up while still following the traditional districting criteria.
Okay. And all versions of your simulated equivalent to HD 25 are Democratic districts.
Yeah, they're all above 50%. Now, I mean, what's noticeable there is that almost all of them are more moderate, are closer to 50%. They're not quite as extreme as HD 25, but they are all certainly above 50%.
But HD 25 falls within the range of your simulated maps.
Actually, I think it's barely, and I'm not sure, it's not really inside of the range. You can see that all the gray circles, except for that one gray circle that's right above HD 25, all the other gray circles are clearly to the left. In other words, more politically moderate, or closer to 50%, I should say. than HD 25.
But you've got one gray circle for your simulated maps that corresponds with your predicted democratic strength of HD 25.
I see that it's virtually right at HD 25, and again, that's 1 out of 1,000. 1 out of 1,000.
What's the difference between the upper end of your simulated maps for HD 25 and your predicted democratic strength for the enacted version?
Okay, I mean, obviously, like I just said, you can see that that one gray circle out of 1,000, that is at the extreme right end of that distribution. That is virtually the same as HD 25. I mean, I can't tell you what the difference is, but I think you and I can agree that that one is pretty close to the same thing. Again, that's 1 out of 1,000. All the remaining 999 simulated districts there, you can see, are to the left.
Right.
So it's an extreme partisan outlier.
What's the difference between the enacted HD 25 and the next bar that you have for your simulated maps that looks like it's at 52%?
Well, again, I don't know the precise number, but you know, it's obviously going to be something in the ballpark of about 2%, maybe a little under 2%.
Okay. Now moving to HD 7, which is the second row, all versions of your simulated maps show that this would be a Republican majority district.
It would be a district with a Democratic vote share below 50. So yeah, I would call it, I would classify it as a Republican district.
Right. And can you give me an idea of what your estimated Democratic voting strength is for the enacted HD 7?
Well, it looks like here I'm reporting that HD 7 has a Democratic vote share, using my measure, of something around 43%.
And what's the difference between that vote share and the lower end of your simulated maps?
Oh, it looks like it's somewhere in the ballpark of about 2%. I mean, basically what's really clear here is that the gray circles, the vast majority of those gray circles are probably about 2% higher than the red star there. So they're basically significantly closer to 50%.
All right, let's move to figure 31, which is Plans Exhibit 51. And this is your county grouping analysis for the Granville, Person, Vance, Warren County grouping. Is that fair to say that, Dr. Chen?
Yes, I see that.
Okay, is it fair to say that all of your simulated maps would result in HD 32 being a Democratic district?
Yeah, it looks like there are 4 different possibilities. There are 4 rows of gray bars. Certainly all of them are over 50% Democratic vote share. So yeah, that's what I see.
And similarly, your estimate on the Democratic voting strength of HD 32 falls within the range of your simulated maps.
Well, it's within the range. I mean, it's quite notable here that in this particular county grouping, like I just said, there are only 4 different ways of drawing up this county grouping in the simulations. And of those 4 different ways, the enacted plan picks the most Republican version. I'm sorry, the most partisan extreme version, or in other words, the most heavily Democratic version of those 4. So it's the most partisan extreme. It's within the range, but it's the most extreme of the 4.
All right, and then if we go down to HD2, is it fair to say that all versions of your simulated maps would result in HD2 being a majority Republican district?
Yeah, there are 4 rows. All 4 of them are below 50%. And it looks like one of those rows is just barely below 50%.
All right, let's move to figure 32, House Simulation Set 1. Lenore Pitt County grouping, Plans Exhibit 52. And you studied 3 districts in this county group, correct, Dr. Chen?
Yes, there are 3 districts in this county grouping.
And the enacted versions of those 3 districts, well, the enacted version of House District 8 falls within your range of your simulated maps. Is that correct?
Did you say HD8?
Yes.
I believe that is not correct.
That's not within the range?
No, I mean, and you can see, and Mr. Farr, I think this will help out. If you will just look at the numbers I've reported on the right column, you know, if you'll recall, Mr. Jacobson and I discussing this at length on Tuesday, those numbers on the right column, in every one of these figures, they'll tell you the percentage of the simulated districts in that row that are to the left and to the right of that red star. And so if you really, really look closely in at the red star at HD8, you'll see that all 1,000 of those gray circles are to the left. And so that's what those numbers are telling
All
you.
right, my mistake. But HD8 is pretty close to being within your range.
I mean, I would describe it as an extreme partisan outlier. I won't belabor the point, but I think you've heard me say this many times.
I have, and my question is HD8 close to being within your range?
It is very close to the very extreme right end of the range.
All right. Now, if we go down to HD12, is it not true that HD12 is within the range of your simulated maps?
It's within the range. It's still an outlier. Just I wouldn't say it's an extreme statistical outlier. It is, you know, it's on the Republican side. It's more Republican than 81.3% of the corresponding simulated plan. So that's within the range, but kind of an outlier, not an extreme statistical outlier.
Okay. And then if we go to HD9, all versions of your simulated equivalents to HD9 would be Republican majority districts.
Well, they would have slight Republican majorities. They would be much closer to being 50-50 districts than the enacted plan's HD9. So they would be more politically moderate. They would be less favorable to the Republicans than HD9. But certainly they would be slightly Republican districts.
All right. And how far away is HD9 as you project the Democratic strength of that district from the lower end of your range?
From the lower end of the range, it looks like maybe about 2% or so, maybe a little less than 2%.
All right, let's turn now to figure 33 from House Set 1, Plans Exhibit 53, which is your analysis of the Mecklenburg County grouping.
Okay.
Now, Dr. Chen, under your analysis and your evaluation of HD 106, 98, 103, all of those enacted districts fall within the range of your simulated maps.
All right, you read out a couple there. Could you just read those out again?
Lower 3.
Okay, did you say 103, 98, and 105 then? Because that's what's on the lower 3.
That's what I meant to say.
Okay. So you're asking me about 103, 98, and 105. And it looks as if they are barely within the range. All 3 of those are certainly extreme partisan outliers. You can see that with all 3 of them, the enacted versions of those 3 districts are more heavily Republican than over 98.5% of the corresponding simulated districts in each of those 3 rows. So they are very barely within the range. They are extreme partisan outliers.
And HD 104 is very close to being within the range.
It's clearly outside of the range. I suppose it is, pretty close to being at the very extreme left of the range, but it's a clear partisan outlier.
And under your algorithms for Mecklenburg County, your simulated maps result, some of your simulated maps result in districts that could elect 4 Republicans in Mecklenburg County.
Well, that is not the way that I interpret the partisan characteristics of any of these districts or any of these groupings. I'll just restate it. There are 4 rows here where you can see that some significant number of the simulated districts would have a Democratic vote share using the 2010 to 16 statewide election composite that's below 50%. But certainly in all 4 of those rows, those 4 bottom rows, the enacted districts, the enacted plan's version of those 4 districts are extreme partisan outliers. They are more heavily Republican than almost all of the corresponding simulated districts.
All right, and you're aware, Dr. Chen, that the Republicans won no districts in Mecklenburg County in 2018?
I'm aware of that, and I mean, 2018 was a Democratic tied year.
Even though you stated in your deposition you didn't know what that meant.
I believe that you had me read from my deposition where you would ask me the question, wave year, or something like that. And I just, let me,
Sorry?
you would ask me about wave year, and I just asked you to clarify that. I told you, I've heard the term before. I have an idea that different people mean different things by that. Would you please tell me what you mean by that? That's what happened in deposition. We just read from the transcript earlier this morning.
Yes, we did. Is there a difference between a tied election and a wave election?
I'm just going to, I don't want to waste your time. I would just give you the same answer, which is that I think different people mean slightly different things. I've obviously been using the term tied year to talk about an election year like 2018, where the Democrats do relatively well. You know, I think I earlier testified about 2016 being kind of a Republican tied year. And I was just telling you that different people mean slightly different things. We all kind of have a general idea of what we mean by those terms, but I was asking you to clarify what you wanted me to understand by wave year.
Mr. Carr, we're going to take more frequent, shorter breaks today, and so we're going to take a break until 10:20. This clock in here is a little bit off, so that's about 7 or 8 minutes from now. We'll resume at 10:20. Superior Court stands in recess at 10:20.
I see that.
And you, in your assessment that we see in the chart above the map, you assess House District 20 as a majority Republican district.
I calculated as, looks like about 44%, so that would be on the Republican side.
So your Democratic voting strength is 44%.
Well, it's Democratic vote share using these elections, but I think we've talked about that.
Yes, that would mean it's a 56% Republican. The enacted version.
I think your math is right there. It's 56% approximately.
Okay. The blind squirrel finds an acorn once in a while, Dr. Chen. Let's just turn to the next exhibit 58. This is your Buncombe County House analysis for simulation set 1. You remember you testified about this group yesterday, Dr. Chen, and I think you said that the General Assembly did not follow the incumbency protection criteria in this county.
Yeah, I think I just specifically talked about how there were two incumbents that were paired.
Now, you know that this configuration of Buncombe County was drawn in 2011,
Yes, I realize that.
and you're not aware of any incumbency protection criteria that the General Assembly used in 2011, are you?
Didn't study that.
All right, now let's turn to Plans Exhibit 94. I'm going to move, I have a few questions about Senate groups, and then I'm going to try to wrap up. Figure 74, Plans Exhibit 94, is your Ken group analysis of the Alamance, Guilford, and Randolph group. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Dr. Chen, do you recall that the special master redrew districts in this group?
I believe the special master was tasked with redrawing SD 28.
And do you know whether he also redrew SD 27?
I believe that the special master had to make adjustments to 27 and 24 in order to accommodate the new boundaries of 28.
Okay. And you didn't freeze SD 27 when you ran your simulations?
No, that wouldn't really make sense.
Okay. And was the special master motivated to help Republicans when he redrew SD 27?
I mean, I'm obviously not going to be able to have a basis to answer that question. I think you're asking me about the special master's motivation, intentions.
Okay. And the special master's version of SD 27, which was used in 2018, is right on the edge of the range of your simulated maps. It's not in the range, but it's right on the edge of it. Is that correct?
I'm going to answer your question, Mr. Farr. Look, I don't want to take up to take up the court's time here, and I'll just tell you that obviously SD 27 was not what the special master was tasked with redrawn. The special master made small changes to a small portion of the boundaries in SD 27 in order to accommodate the other district, SD 28. So I take issue with calling it the special master's version of the district. The special master made small adjustments to the district. So I just wanted to say that.
Okay, but the small adjustments you're referring to, again, are the way the district was. You didn't do any population study in your report, how much population you moved.
I'm going to give the same answer that I gave when we talked about Guilford a while back in the House. I know that it's a small portion of the geography of SD 27. It's a small portion of the district's population that was affected by the special master. Obviously, I wasn't tasked with analyzing that specifically in my report, but I generally know that to be the case.
Okay. All versions of your simulated SD 27 would be majority Republican.
So it's just going to be more accurate to say that the second most Democratic district in the simulated plans in this grouping would be Republican leaning, but they would be more moderate, or they would have a higher Democratic vote share than SD 27.
But for all your simulations, the Democratic vote share is under 50%.
It's under 50%.
Okay. And are you aware of the fact that a Democratic candidate won SB 27 in 2018?
Happy to take your word for it.
Let's turn to figure 80, which is exhibit 100. And that's your study of the Blade and Tender Brunswick, New Hanover group.
Yes, sir.
In your Senate simulation set 1. And you analyzed this group using the 2004 to 2010 composite, is that correct?
Yes.
The 2004 to 2010 composite had a higher Democratic vote share than the 2010 to the 2016 composite, is that correct?
I don't specifically remember. I think I described it in my report. I'm happy to take your word for it.
And would you take my word for it that it was over the 2004 to 2010 composites over 50% Democratic?
I'll take your word for it.
Okay. So using the 2004 2010 composite is going to make the districts in this group look more Democrat than if you use the 2010 to 2016 data.
Given what you just represented, that sounds about right.
And is this one of the plans where you have a very limited number of unique maps?
It is.
Could your unique map be as low as 2?
That actually looks to be pretty close to right.
All right. Could we pull up, I believe it's exhibit 36, and do a side-by-side shot? And we could blow up 36, so we can get a better look at New Hanover. Excuse me, turn it on. Okay, so our technical support, very good technical support man, has just blown up what I think is the 2011 version of this county group. And you see, Dr. Chen, that there's a little squiggle in Hanover County that's put in Senate District 8.
Yes.
And you understand that they had to take population out of New Hanover County to equalize the population.
Well, in general, if you're going to draw equally populated districts here, you've got to take some part of New Hanover out and shift it into that Blade and Pender Brunswick district.
Okay. Now, could we turn to the one version of exhibit 36? So, Dr. Chen, you testified about this yesterday. Could you refresh my memory on? I apologize. I don't really recall what you said about this exhibit.
Well, it's a computer simulated map. I think that's what was said about it.
So this is the computer simulated map.
It is a computer simulated map,
And you
one
had-
of the
you had
1,000.
One other version of this.
What's that?
You had one other version of the simulated map of this county group.
Well, this is the one simulated map that's shown in my reports. I think I only produced this one.
Okay.
I mean, we're talking about Senate simulation set 1, and for each of the 4 sets, I only produced one map in my report, or I only showed a figure of one of the 1,000 maps in my reports. I think I did that for all 4 sets of simulations.
Okay. So in your report, would you compare the compacted score for the two districts in the Pender, New Hanover, Brunswick, and Blade County group under your simulated plan to the compactness scores of the districts under the enacted plan?
Same answer as before. I only compared compactness statewide, not individual districts.
Okay, and we see that whereas the enacted plan has a squiggle in the New Hanover, the simulated version of your plan has something like a scoop out of New Hanover at the northern end?
I don't know what you mean by scoop, but I think we can all see the map.
Okay. And we go back and refresh on what we just looked at a second ago. I don't need to pull this map up unless you really want to see it, but didn't we just look at House District 18 in New Hanover, and we agreed that House District 18 is at the northern tip of New Hanover County?
I don't know what you mean by District 18. I don't
House
see that.
District 18.
You're talking about the house plans, and I think we talked about that a while ago. I just can't remember.
Okay,
I'll
okay.
take your word for it, just to
Well,
move
let's
things
look at it.
along.
Let's look at it. Let's put up Plans Exhibit 57. And can you see that House District 20 is in the northern tip of New Hanover County?
Yes.
And we already agreed that under your analysis, House District 20 was about a 56% Republican performing district using the 2004 to 2010 composite.
Yes.
Okay, so now we turn back to Exhibit 36. So now would you agree, Dr. Chen, that this simulated version that you produced will take a scoop out of the top of House District 18?
No, I think, look, we just all looked at the previous map of HD 18 that we all just looked at, and clearly that's not really taking a scoop out of HD 18. We all just saw the map that you just put up.
It's not taking territory out of House District 18?
There may be some overlap, but it's not entirely taking a scoop out of it.
To the extent that we'll have everyone look at that, Dr. Chen, I won't waste the board's time arguing about whether it's a scoop or not. But to the extent that you're taking Republican voters out of House District 18 and putting them into the Senate district that includes Pender, Bladen, and Brunswick, you would be making that district more Republican, would you not?
No, you need to actually look at the actual areas, the actual overlap areas, and look at the partisanship in those areas. You can't just say that it looks like an overlapping portion was placed into the district, whatever that Hanover district was, and automatically make a judgment. You have to actually calculate the numbers to say anything about the partisanship of the districts.
Why is your simulated version better than the one that the legislature adopted?
I have no opinion on whether any of these simulated maps are better than or worse than the General Assembly's enacted plans.
All right, Dr. Chen, I've got one last thing I want to ask you about. In terms of Plans Exhibit 154.
Which tab am I on?
It's the Legislative Defendants Exhibit 154. It's the 10th tab in the witness notebook. You ready?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell the board what this is?
This is a 2013 article that I believe we briefly talked about on Tuesday. It's this 2013 article called Unintentional Gerrymandering, Political Geography and Electoral Bias in Legislatures.
All right, could you just read into the record the part that says abstract that starts on page, that ends at the top of page 240, where there's a line wrong?
Okay, and you just want me to read into the record that whole abstract,
Yes.
covering those 2 pages?
And just where it stops with the line, top of 240.
Okay. While conventional wisdom holds that partisan bias in U.S. legislative elections results from intentional partisan and racial gerrymandering, we demonstrate that substantial bias can also emerge from patterns of human geography. We show that in many states, Democrats are inefficiently concentrated in large cities and smaller industrial agglomerations, such that they can expect to win fewer than 50% of the seats when they win 50% of the votes. To measure this unintentional gerrymandering, we use automated districting simulations based on precinct-level 2000 presidential election results in several states. Our results illustrate a strong relationship between the geographic concentration of Democratic voters and electoral bias favoring Republicans.
All right, thank you, Dr. Chen. Could you turn to page 246? And is it fair to say that there's a map of the state of Florida on page 246?
There is a map of Florida, and I'm just going to point out for the record that it looks like you gave me a black and white version, and obviously this was a multicolored map in the original article.
It's on the screen, Dr. Chen.
Okay.
And the only question I want to ask you is the color version, which I definitely want to give you, it's got blue and red coloring. Could you tell the board what it represents? Why is there blue shading on this map and why is there red shading?
Well, as I report in the title of that figure here, the blue and the red are the Bush vote share, the 2000 U.S. President Bush vote share.
So does this go to the typical red-blue?
Exactly. Red areas are ones where President Bush did better. Blue areas are the precincts where Al Gore did better.
All right, that's all I have on that. Now, Dr. Chen, could you turn to page 251? You see where it says number 3? Simulation results?
Yes.
Could you just read into the record the first paragraph that starts on 251 and ends on page 252?
Okay, you want me to read that entire paragraph?
Yes, sir.
Okay. For each procedure, we perform 25 simulations of Florida districting plans for each of a range of reasonable legislature sizes, ranging from 2 to 200 districts. For each simulation, we can simply aggregate the precinct-level Bush-Gore vote counts within each district and count up the number of districts in which Bush received a majority. The expectation is that if there is no partisan bias, the average share of pro-Bush districts should be around 50%.
Thank you. Now, there's a figure 4 that's on page 252. Could you tell the court what those figures are?
Okay, I'll try and be as brief as possible, and I'm just going to point out that you asked me that same question in deposition. I gave you a much lengthier response and explained all the details about it. I'll just try and be as brief as possible here, as best as I can. There are 2 simulation algorithms here. There are 2 sets of simulations, or 2 supersets, I think is how I described it when you deposed me. There's one simulation algorithm on the left here, where, well, let me just start on the right. I think that makes more sense. There is one set of simulations, one superset of simulations on the right, where I had the computer simulation algorithm try to maximize compactness, place compactness above all else. So really try and maximize compactness and produce districting plans of varying sizes for Florida and measure the partisanship of those plans using the 2000 presidential vote share, which is a virtually tied election, which was kind of the theme or the main focus of this particular academic article. So I did that for really drawing really compact districts. And then on the left, I did the opposite. I actually completely ignored compactness. I tried to draw very non-compact districts just to see if intentionally drawing compact districts in a nonpartisan manner would lead to districting outcomes that are very different for when you ignore compactness or try to draw non-compact districts in a nonpartisan manner. And I found that largely there was not a partisan difference in the electoral bias of these plans. In other words, intentionally drawing very compact districts in a nonpartisan fashion was not causing some sort of additional or different electoral bias than if you intentionally drew non-compact districts, at least in Florida, if you drew non-compact districts, again, in a nonpartisan manner. And again, the whole point here is that drawing compact districts doesn't somehow cause electoral bias. It's partisan intent, which is what causes electoral bias, or what causes partisan bias. So that was the whole point of those two figures here, just comparing those two sets of simulations, or two supersets of simulations side by side.
Okay. Could you read into the record the text that you have on page 252 under figure 4?
Okay, you want me to read that whole paragraph there
Yes.
at figure 4?
Which explains the charts. That's why I want you to read that, Dr. Chen.
Okay. Figure 4, Republican electoral bias in simulated Florida districting plans. Note, black dots indicate the average share of simulated districts that have pro-Bush majorities in the simulated plans. Gray bars depict the entire range of pro-Bush district shares that were observed across all simulations for each given legislature size. Red bars depict the range of simulated outcomes for legislatures of 25 districts, Florida's congressional delegation, 40 districts, the Florida State Senate, and 120 districts, the Florida State House.
Thank you. Could you turn to page 253?
Yes.
Could you just read into the record the second full paragraph on 253 that begins, "We find"?
Okay, you want me to read that whole paragraph starting "we find"?
Yes.
We find that the real-life districting plans enacted by the Republican-controlled Florida legislature in 2002 are all within the range of districting plans produced by our simulation procedures. For example, in 2002, the state legislature enacted a congressional districting plan in which Bush voters outnumbered Gore voters in 17 out of 25 districts, or 68%. This level of pro-Republican electoral bias falls just within the tail of the distribution of electoral biases produced across all of the randomly simulated compact districting plans, 56 to 68%, as illustrated in Figure 4. Hence, because the enacted districting plan falls within the range of plans produced by our compact districting procedure, we are simply unable to prove beyond a doubt that the enacted districting plan represents an intentional partisan Republican gerrymander.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. Could you turn to page 257? Now, Dr. Chen, could you read into the record the text that starts with the second full paragraph, running through the paragraph on page 260 that stops before section 6?
All right, that's quite a bit of text over 4 pages there. You sure you want me to read the whole thing?
I do.
So you want me to start from the second full paragraph on page 257 that starts with second?
Yes, sir.
And you want me to read all the way to 4 pages later to the top of page 260, basically?
That's right.
Okay. Second, to determine whether an electorally neutral districting plan in Florida is achievable in real-life practice, we examined the districting plans proposed by Democrats in the state legislature. Even though Florida's state legislature was controlled by the Republican Party during the 2002 redistricting cycle, Democratic legislators are nevertheless permitted to propose their own districting plans, and many did so in 2002. We examined these Democrat-proposed districting plans in order to assess how the most Democrat-favorable districting proposals fared in terms of electoral bias. Specifically, we obtained district-level statistics for every proposed districting plan submitted to the Florida Senate during the 2002 redistricting cycle to see how these real-world districting proposals compare against our non-compact simulated districting plans. Figure 6 displays the number of Bush-leaning districts in the congressional, Figure 6A, and the Florida Senate, Figure 6B, districting plans adopted by the Republican-dominated legislature in 2002. Additionally, Figure 6 also displays the number of Bush-leaning districts in each of the alternative districting proposals submitted during the redistricting process by various Republican legislators, by various Democratic legislators, and by the League of Women Voters, hereinafter LWV, in the Florida legislature. I'm just going to take a drink of water here. Figure 6 displays the share of majority Republican seats generated by each proposed plan and each computer-simulated plan, as well as a histogram displaying the distribution of Republican seat shares generated by 100 of our simulations. Figure 6A displays plans for the Florida delegation to the U.S. House, and Figure 6B displays plans for the Florida Senate. In terms of electoral bias, every one of the submitted plans falls well within the range of the simulated districting plans. Not surprisingly, the Republican plans tend to produce larger Republican majorities than Democratic or LWV plans, but remarkably, not a single unbiased or pro-Democratic plan was submitted by any of the Democratic legislators. Of course, we cannot conclude from Figure 6 that Democrats submit biased plans solely because of the constraints generated by human geography. However, at a minimum, Figure 6 suggests that the level of bias produced in the real world of strategic partisan cartographers, courts, and the Voting Rights Act is not radically different from that produced by human geography alone. We acknowledge, however, that various political considerations may have influenced the drawing of the various Democrat-submitted plans. For example, important considerations for Democratic cartographers include minority representation and protection of incumbents, especially those incumbents submitting the districting proposals. An additional possibility is that Democratic mapmakers understood that a pro-Democratic redistricting plan would never secure passage in the Republican-controlled state legislature. Hence, perhaps only plans with built-in Republican bias were even worth submitting.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. Now, I just have 2 questions here. When you wrote about protection of incumbents, what did you mean by that?
I didn't have any particular idea in mind about the form or the application. It's just generally known that very often partisan map drawers are motivated by some general form of incumbency protection.
Okay. And my other question is, in your report, did you do any analysis or comparison of the plans submitted by Democrats or Common Cause, similar to what you did in this article for the Florida Democratic and League of Women Voter proposed plans?
No, beyond what I've already testified about, which I won't waste your time by reviewing.
Okay. I have one more question. Dr. Chen, could you turn to page 266? Could you read into, are there, Dr. Chen?
Yes, sir.
Could you read into the record the paragraph that is in your article? It's the second full paragraph. It begins with the word although. Could you read that into the record?
Okay, you want that entire paragraph there.
I do.
Okay. Although presidential and statewide elections have been quite close over the last decade, the Republicans have consistently controlled between 60 and 70% of the seats in Florida's state legislature and congressional delegation. Beyond the electoral bias in the transformation of votes to seats that we illustrate in this paper, and Salbaher et al. 2012, describe another more subtle impact of the asymmetric distribution of partisans across districts. It is conceivable that because of the extent to which liberals are packed into urban districts, the Democratic platform, or at least its perception by Florida voters, is driven by its legislative incumbents, a small group of leftists from Miami-Dade and Broward counties who never face Republican challengers, which in turn makes it difficult for the party to compete in the crucial moderate districts. This hypothesis may help to explain why the Democrats consistently receive higher vote shares in presidential than in state races.
Higher vote shares in presidential than in state races.
That's what I read.
Okay. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Oh, excuse me. Let me go first to the
Intervening defendants. All right, and this. Mr. Cox? Thank you. All right, so now I think we can turn to the plaintiffs again. Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. For efficiency's sake, may I approach and just hand you all the demonstratives I'm going to use?
Yes.
Do it one by one, and we'll get them to. Morning, Dr. Chen.
Good morning.
I will try to be as brief as possible so the rest of my team doesn't want to kill me any more than they already do. Dr. Chen, do you recall just this morning Mr. Farr asked you a series of questions about certain districts that the special master tweaked or altered in Guilford County in both the House and the Senate?
Yes.
Let's start with the House. If we could pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 45. And I'll do this very briefly because I know we just went over this. Dr. Chen, you testified that you froze House Districts 57, 60, and 61, but didn't freeze HD 59. Is that correct?
Just a correction, 57, 61, and 62.
Thank you for correcting me. But you did not freeze HD 59.
Correct.
And do you recall Mr. Farr asking you a series of questions specifically about HD 59 and whether your analysis was somehow showing or meant to show that the special master acted with partisan intent in drawing HD 59?
I remember that question.
If we can now pull up what we're calling Plaintiff's Demonstrative Chen D5. If we could go to the third page.
Your Honor? Yes, sir. I'm going to object to these exhibits because this is new, undisclosed expert testimony, very, very similar, if not identical, to the analysis that Dr. Thornton did on the number of unique maps, which the court excluded on the grounds that it was not disclosed in time for the expert witness deadline.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Several responses. First, these are just demonstratives. We're not going to be admitting these into exhibits into evidence. The parties have an agreement. I'm happy to give you a copy that demonstratives to be used in redirect specifically don't need to be disclosed to the other side ahead of the time of redirect. Our agreement was that demonstratives were direct due, but not ones for impeachment or redirect. And all of these demonstratives are just directly responsive to questions that Mr. Farr asked on cross. So obviously, he opened the door to Dr. Chen explaining his answers that he provided on cross through demonstratives.
Mr. Farr?
Your Honor, to be quite honest with you, I don't get the difference between a real exhibit and a demonstrative exhibit. But whatever you want to call it, this is entirely new expert analysis by Dr. Chen. The court, for example, excluded maps that Raleigh Myers drew on the grounds that they were undisclosed expert testimony. And I don't know how these maps are any different from the maps that Raleigh Myers did that the court excluded, or how these exhibits are any different from the summaries that Dr. Thornton did of how many unique maps that Dr. Chen had in his simulation plans. They shouldn't be able to backdoor undisclosed expert testimony through the guise of a demonstrative exhibit, and particularly when I don't see the difference between a demonstrative exhibit and a real exhibit. They have the same effect.
Objections overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. If we could go to the third page of Chen D5. Dr. Chen, what's the red area in this demonstrative represent? Well, let me ask you a question. All of the colors in this demonstrative. Actually, let me go back to my first question. What does the red area in this demonstrative represent?
The red area here are areas that the special master did not change from the HB 927 version of District 59. So areas that were, I'm sorry, I'll start over. The red areas are areas that were in both HB 59. I'm going to start all over. The red areas are areas that were in both House Bill 927's version as well as the special master's version of House District 59. So they were areas of HD 59 that the special master did not change.
So Dr. Chen, the red areas are the areas of the current HD 59 that were there as passed by the General Assembly and not altered by the special master? I got that right?
Exactly.
What does the green area represent?
The green area is the area that was moved out of District 59 by the special master.
And how about the pink area on the far left?
The pink area is the area that the special master moved into HD 59.
So the only part of the current HD 59 as it sits today and as you analyze that was added by the special master is just that small pink area on the top there?
Exactly, what I explained to Mr. Farr earlier this morning as the northwest corner of HD 59.
Dr. Chen, did any of your simulations alter at all the pink area or the green area that the special master adjusted?
No, not at all.
If we could go to the next page of the same demonstrative. What does the blue area represent on this demonstrative?
Those are the only parts of HD 59 that were sometimes altered by the computer simulated plans, that were sometimes assigned to a different district.
And were any of those blue areas that your simulations alter areas that the special master touched in any way?
No, not at all.
So to the extent that you find that HD 59 is a partisan outlier, is it as a result in any way of anything the special master did?
No, not at all.
If we could go now to Chen demonstrative D6. I'm sorry, I'm going out of order. Yeah, Chen demonstrative D6. And you recall Mr. Farr asked you questions about the Senate county grouping in Guilford that the special master made some changes to?
Yes.
If we could go to the third page of this demonstrative. And what does the red area on this demonstrative show?
The red areas are the areas where the special master, the areas of SD 27 where the special master did not make changes. In other words, they are the areas that were in both the Senate Bill 691's version as well as the Special Master's version of SD 27.
So the red areas are the areas of the current SD 27 as it exists today that were originally drawn by the legislature and not changed by the Special Master?
Exactly.
And how about the green area?
The green area there is the area that was moved out of SD 27 by the Special Master, so is no longer in District 27.
And how about the pink?
Those three pink areas that you see are the areas that were moved into SD 27 by the Special Master. In the General Assembly's version, they were not, and then now by the Special Master's redrawing, they are.
And did your simulations of, and I should ask you, it's not on this chart here, but SD 26, the one that's in the bottom left of this grouping, and it's the one that sort of has a,
It's the district that comes from Randolph County.
and it has a little bit of a piece that comes up that we see in the bottom left corner here, that white part, is that right?
Yes, it's the district that comes from Randolph County and then also includes the small southwestern corner of Guilford County.
And the Special Master made no changes at all to that district?
Correct.
Does your simulations change at all any of the pink or the green areas here that the Special Master touched?
No, not at all.
If we could go to the next page of this same demonstrative. What does the blue areas show here?
Those are the only areas in SD 27 that are in fact sometimes changed by the computer simulated plans. In other words, they are sometimes assigned to the Randolph County-based district.
And so to the extent that your simulations find that SD 26 and SD 27 are partisan outliers, is that at all caused by anything the Special Master did?
No, not at all.
Moving to the next topic, Dr. Chen, yesterday you were asked a series of questions by Mr. Farr about whether you had tried to create simulated maps that exactly match the enacted plans in terms of the number of municipalities and BTD splits and on compactness. Do you recall that series of questions?
Yes.
And do you recall Mr. Farr suggesting that the legislature may have been, I think the words he used was just making a policy decision to split more municipalities and BTDs than your simulated plans and to make the enacted plan less compact than your simulated plans?
I remember that.
Dr. Chen, in your vast redistricting experience, are you aware of any jurisdiction that as a quote policy matter has said that it prefers to split more municipalities than it needs to?
No, never. That would make no sense.
How about BTDs?
No.
How about any jurisdiction that says, as a matter of discretionary policy, we prefer to make districts much less compact than they need to be?
No.
Dr. Chen, based on your redistricting experience, can you think of any nonpartisan reason why a jurisdiction would want to split a bunch of municipalities that it doesn't need to?
No, of course not.
Can you, BTDs?
No.
Compactness?
No.
In a similar vein, yesterday Mr. Farr asked you whether someone, a map maker or yourself, I think was the question, could try to do really, really well on certain traditional districting criteria as sort of a stealth way to gain partisan advantage. Do you remember those questions?
I do.
And I think specifically in respect to compactness, whether you could or were trying to create really, really compact districts as a stealth way to help Democrats.
Yes.
You just touched on this very briefly, but in your academic work, have you in fact studied whether creating super compact districts in a nonpartisan way inherently favors Democrats in some way?
Yes. In that 2013 academic article that Mr. Farr just had me read very large portions from.
And what did you find very briefly?
I found that if you follow a map drawing process that really tries to maximize compactness, but in a nonpartisan way, that does not cause electoral bias or partisan bias when compared to a map drawing process that doesn't, that tries to draw very non-compact districts in a nonpartisan way. Just trying to draw compact districts in a nonpartisan way does not cause some kind of partisan bias.
Also on the issue of traditional districting criteria, do you recall Mr. Farr asking you a series of questions yesterday about districts that were drawn in 2011 as opposed to 2017, and whether you knew sort of what the official criteria used during the 2011 redistricting process were?
I remember that.
Dr. Chen, were the traditional districting criteria traditional back in 2011?
Yes, they were.
They didn't become traditional after 2011?
They didn't just become traditional overnight.
Was it possible for legislative defendants to subordinate traditional districting criteria to partisan intent in creating districts in 2011?
Of course it was.
Mr. Farr represented to you that the General Assembly lacked legal authority to change these specific districts in 2017 while it was changing other districts. Let's assume for the sake of argument, or for the sake of this question, that that's true. Would that mean that these 2011 districts stopped subordinating traditional districting principles merely because they were reenacted without change in 2017?
No, they would still be subordinating traditional districting principles.
Do you also recall yesterday, and I think today as well, Mr. Farr asked you if you had isolated just the districts that were drawn in 2017, redrawn in 2017, so took out the ones that were drawn in 2011 and unchanged, and compared the compactness of just those districts to sort of the corresponding set of districts from the same county groupings that were redrawn in 2017. Do you remember those questions?
Yes.
And I believe you told Mr. Farr that while you didn't include the calculations in your report, since he asked you about it at your deposition, you had in fact gone and done those calculations.
Yes, I have.
And what did you find making the comparison between just those districts redrawn in 2017 and the corresponding ones?
Objection, Your Honor. This is undisclosed expert testimony.
Your Honor, oh, sorry.
Mr. Jacobson.
Mr. Farr asked the witness this question yesterday and opened the door to it. He obviously wouldn't be asking this question right now. How would he not ask that question yesterday? He has a right to provide an answer.
May I be heard on that, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
If this had been done in his report, I may have asked the question completely differently, and his cross-examination could have been done differently, and there might have been ways that I could have attacked whatever these calculations may be about districts in 2011. We've not seen this testimony before, or this analysis, and does this mean our experts can come forward now and offer brand new testimony because of questions they were asked in their deposition, like Dr. Ford now come in and offer her analysis of how many unique maps that Dr. Chen drew because that came up in the deposition? It seems like the rule ought to apply both ways.
I'll just be brief. It's not because he was asked in the deposition, it's because he was asked on cross-examination. Obviously, if we ask Dr. Thornton questions about unique simulations, of course she can provide answers on redirect.
Mr. Brand, I'd just like to point out that when Mr. Farr asked the question, it elicited the fact that Dr. Chen had performed this additional analysis. Mr. Farr later, after learning about the additional analysis, directed his questioning to the analysis that Dr. Chen performed and was disclosed to counsel and to the parties in his report. He specifically refrained from asking Dr. Chen about this additional undisclosed information. So this hasn't come out on direct. Mr. Farr didn't know about it. When he found out about it for the first time, he declined to ask any questions about it. So this is absolutely undisclosed expert opinion that should not be allowed in.
Was this information within the data that was provided to the defendants?
Yes, Your Honor. The data provided, and Dr. Chen can correct me if I'm getting this wrong, all the data provided the compactness scores of every single individual district in every single one of the simulations. So you would just merely need to pick the ones that were redrawn in 2017 and take an average.
Well, Your Honor, so is the data about how many unique maps that Dr. Chen drew. That was included in the data that was provided, but our expert wasn't allowed to testify about that. And why would we examine data about points of law or analysis of the map that Dr. Chen didn't include in his reports? That's very unfair to the defendants, Your Honor.
And Judge, I'd just like to add that there's a distinction between the pretty massive data set that Dr. Chen provided and the opinions offered on that data set.
So let me make sure that I understand, or we understand exactly the posture of this. Dr. Chen was asked at deposition, did you do this sort of analysis? The answer was no, he did not. He subsequently went back after the deposition, did that analysis, and now at trial, he's provided the data underlying his analysis, but now at trial, he is testifying for the first time the results of those analysis.
Right, in response to their questions.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, the objection is sustained.
Okay. Dr. Chen, if we could pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 4. Do you recall yesterday, Mr. Farr, he said to you, well, let's take a starting point. He noted for you that there were 29 total Senate county groupings.
Yes.
And do you recall Mr. Farr saying that because you had said that there were only 8 Senate county groupings redrawn in 2017 that contained multiple districts, meaning that weren't sort of fully formed by the whole county rule, Mr. Farr said that therefore there was only that 21 of the 29 total county groupings are sort of fully formed by the whole county rule, just dividing 29 by 21. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Was Mr. Farr correct in that assertion?
Well, no, I mean, some of these county groupings were 2011 county groupings.
So that math didn't include groupings drawn in 2011 that contain multiple districts that aren't fully formed by the whole county rule?
Exactly.
And of course, do some county groupings contain more districts than other county groupings?
Yes.
Dr. Chen, do you know how many total districts, not county groupings, but districts, are not fully formed by the whole county rule in the Senate out of the 50 districts?
Yeah, out of those 50 districts, 33 of them are in groupings that have multiple districts. And then 17, the remaining 17, are in county groupings that have just a single district. So obviously those 17 are the ones that are dictated by the whole county rule.
So the map maker has discretion, some amount of discretion over 33 of the 50 Senate districts.
Yeah, 33 out of 50.
And let's pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 3, which is the House. Same question I just asked you. Do you know, if we just look at districts, not county groupings, but districts, how many of the total districts out of the 120 House districts are not fully formed by the whole county rule?
It's 107. So 107 of the House districts are in county groupings where there's more than one district. The remaining 13 districts are in 13 county groupings that each just have a single district.
So the map maker has some amount of discretion over 107 of the 120 House districts?
Exactly, 107 out of 120.
If we could pull up what was marked yesterday as Legislative Defendants 283, I think it was an impeachment exhibit. Dr. Chen, do you recall Mr. Farr asking you about this 2018 state Supreme Court election yesterday?
Yes.
As an initial matter, to your knowledge, has the North Carolina General Assembly ever indicated that it's used judicial elections to measure the partisanship of state House and state Senate districts?
No.
But in any event, let's look at this election. Dr. Chen, how many candidates were in this election?
There are 3.
Are you generally familiar at a high level with the circumstances of Mr. Christopher Anglin's candidacy in this race?
Yeah, he was previously a Democrat who decided to run as a Republican. It caused a lot of controversy, generated a lot of media attention.
Based on your expertise in political science, when there is a third candidate in the race who's not the main candidate of either of the 2 major parties, but is sort of a, iconoclast figure, does that candidate tend to draw votes from both of the other 2 candidates?
Yeah, especially if, like Mr. Anglin here, It's a candidate that has a bit of a history with both parties.
Is it a realistic assumption that if Mr. Anglin had not been in the race, that literally every single one of his votes that were cast for him would have been cast for Justice Jackson instead?
No, that's not a realistic assumption.
So let's state as just a very conservative assumption, very conservative, that if Mr. Anglin had not been in the race, that Justice Earls would have received, let's say, 1/5 of the votes that he received. So in other words, Justice Jackson would have received 4/5, 80% of the total votes that Mr. Anglin received. Will you make that assumption?
Sure.
Under that hypothetical, what percentage of the votes would Justice Earls have received?
Your Honor, I'm for the hour of the witness on this because I don't think there's any grounds to say that he's an expert in trying to predict how many people would vote for a candidate in a three-party race.
We're going to give you the opportunity to recross, and so I think you'll have the opportunity to impeach this testimony if you choose to.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Dr. Chen, purely as a hypothetical that I'm asking you to accept, well, let me back up. You testified that based on your political science expertise, when there's a third candidate in a race who's sort of an iconoclast, he draws a non-zero amount of votes from the other two candidates in general in political science that's known?
Yeah, I mean, it would never be 100% on one side and 0% on another side. And I said, look, I mean, especially if it's a candidate that has a history with the Democrats and with the Republicans, then of course, it's not reasonable to expect that all of the votes would come from one party.
Okay, so let's just, again, my hypothetical, Justice Earls would have received 1/5 of the votes that Mr. Anglin received. What percent of the vote share would Justice Earls have received?
So just doing the math here, we're going to take Mr. Anglin's 16.37%, and you asked me to divide it by 5 and add that to Justice Earls' total of 49.56%. And you do the math, and it would be a little bit under 53%.
Okay, let's pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 10, your uniform swing chart from 2 days ago. Dr. Chen, I know that yesterday you disputed Mr. Farr's approach of taking a different election and overlaying it over this chart, but just following that approach, under a scenario in which Democrats have just under 53% of the statewide vote share, the number you just calculated, how many Democratic districts are there in your simulations?
Well, in the simulations, it looks like most of the simulated plans, a little over half of the simulated plans, would have 60 or more Democratic districts.
Let's pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 42. This is your uniform swing chart for the Senate. Again, just following this approach, statewide environment where, on this chart at least, where Democrats receive just under 53% of the statewide vote, how many seats do Democrats win in the Senate under your simulations?
And once again, I'm going to go to the row that's right below 53%, which is 52.92%. And we look on that row, and you can see that all 1,000 of the simulations would give the Democrats 25 or more Senate districts.
Moving to the next topic, Dr. Chen, with respect to Dr. Hoffler's files, Mr. Farr asked you whether it's, quote, plausible that Dr. Hoffler drew districts without using race and then just check the racial statistics sort of after the fact on the back end. Do you remember that testimony?
I remember.
Those questions, I'm sorry.
I remember that.
Dr. Chen, you mentioned in your direct testimony that you reviewed Maptitude files from Dr. Hoffler from July 2017, is that right?
Yes, from July 2017.
Did you find that Dr. Hoffler had racial data on his draft districts in those draft July 2017 maps?
Yes, there was.
So if we assume for the sake of argument that Dr. Hoffler was not fully complete drawing the draft districts in July 2017, did he only have racial data on the districts on the back end after they were done?
No.
we pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 569? Dr. Chen, do you recall Mr. Farr asking you about this exhibit yesterday?
Yes.
And can you just very briefly orient the court as to what this exhibit shows?
Well, this is a plan, a maptitude plan called NC House J25. It was last modified on June the 28th, 2017 at 12:04 p.m. And then we have, of course, a comments field that I described at length on Tuesday, telling us the lineage from which this plan was derived.
Dr. Chen, do you recall Mr. Farr representing to you yesterday that the Supreme Court's decision in the Covington case was on June 28th, 2017?
Yes.
And do you recall Mr. Farr then suggesting to you that many of these draft maps showing up in these lineages here was before that date in
Yes.
the comments field?
Yes.
In fact, Dr. Chen, have you read press statements from Representative Lewis suggesting that Dr. Hoffler was just creating, quote, play maps on his own time, sort of implying that he was creating these play maps unconnected from the Covington case?
Objection, your side.
It's
Overruled. We'll allow it under Rule 703 as a evidence relied upon by the expert, but not substantive evidence.
and we'll move past this quickly.
Yes.
I'd like to briefly go through the actual sequence of Dr. Hoffler's draft maps and how they relate to the Covington case. If we could pull up demonstrative Chen D9. Dr. Chen, what does this appear to be?
This appears to be a rolling in the Covington case, August the 11th, 2016.
And Dr. Chen, I'm going to represent to you that this decision is the decision by the federal district court on the merits that struck down the prior maps on the merits as being racially gerrymandered. Will you accept that representation?
Okay.
Dr. Chen, you testified in your direct that you reviewed the entire contents of two folders titled 2017 redistricting and NC 2017 redistricting. Is that right?
Yes, I did.
Within those folders, what's the earliest date that you found files in those folders relating to the creation of new House and Senate maps?
It was August the 16th, 2016.
So 5 days after this decision?
Yes.
From that date, August 16th, 2016, through what month did you see that Dr. Hoffler in these folders was sort of assessing draft Senate, House and Senate maps on a steady basis?
Through December 2016.
If we could pull up Chen demonstrative D10, I'm sorry. Dr. Chen, does this appear to be an order from the United States Supreme Court?
Yes.
What's the date of this order?
January the 10th, 2017.
And I'll represent to you that this is a Supreme Court order that stayed the portion of the Covington Court's decision that ordered a special election to take place in 2017. Will you accept that representation?
Okay.
In the 2017 redistricting and NC 2017 redistricting plan folders that you analyzed, did you see much of any activity from Dr. Hoffler in the weeks and months after this date?
No.
If we could pull up Chen demonstrative D11. And zoom in on the part that relates to the Covington case. Dr. Chen, does this also appear to be an order from the United States Supreme Court?
It does.
What's the date of it?
June the 5th, 2017.
So, and I'll represent to you that this was the actual order from the United States Supreme Court that affirmed on the merits the striking down of the prior plans on the merits, and obviously would require the drawing of new maps. Will you accept that representation?
Okay?
So it wasn't June 28th, 2017? Will you accept that representation?
It appears not to be June 28th.
In the folders that you analyzed, those same two folders, I won't repeat those names again, when did you see Dr. Hoffler sort of pick up his activity again in drawing new drafts, House and Senate maps?
Around early June.
So if I've got the sequence of events right, in these folders at least, Dr. Hoffler began drawing new House and Senate maps 5 days after the district court's decision, kept working on them on a continuous basis until the U.S. Supreme Court entered a stay, stopped working on them, and then picked up right away again as soon as the Supreme Court affirmed on the merits. Is that right?
Yes.
Dr. Chen, do you recall Mr. Farr asking you a series of questions about whether you had any evidence that legislative defendants knew about Dr. Hoffler's June 2017 draft maps that were substantially complete versions of the final ones?
Yes.
And similarly, do you recall Mr. Farr representing to you yesterday, I think it was at page 42 of the transcript, that Dr. Hoffler, quote, actually drew the maps under the supervision of Senator Hayes and Representative Lewis on a computer, that was given to him by the General Assembly?
Yes.
If we could pull up Chen demonstrative D8. Dr. Chen, what's the title of this document?
It says Legislative Defendant's Position Statement in the Covington case.
And Dr. Chen, I'll represent to you that this is a legal brief that legislative defendants filed in the Covington case that was dated July 6, 2017. Will you accept that representation?
Okay.
And I'll further represent to you that in this brief, legislative defendants were arguing that the federal district court shouldn't order a remedial timeline that would lead to a special election in 2017 for North Carolina, but instead legislative defendants were proposing or requesting a longer remedial timeline. Will you accept that representation?
Okay.
Can we go to page 2 of this brief? Dr. Chen, can you read the first sentence of the second paragraph there on page 2?
Proceeding on that timeline will allow the General Assembly to receive public input, engage in internal discussions about the design of remedial districts, prepare draft remedial plans, receive public responses to those draft remedial plans, and incorporate public feedback into the final plans.
There you go.
I do, actually.
Okay, let's go ahead and take
a break. It's 11:32, and we will break until 11:40.
I didn't ask him about it.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
May I respond very briefly? This is something we cut out of the direct just for the interest of time, and I literally just want him to say he created these exhibits so that there's no dispute that that's where these exhibits came from.
All right, in our discretion, we're going to overrule the objection and allow the authentication of these exhibits.
Thank you. Will you take my word for it that these are figures 234 and 236 of your rebuttal report? And if you don't want to take my word for it, you can obviously check.
They are.
Okay, and you created those exhibits to respond to Dr. Thornton?
I did.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chen. If we could pull back on the screen, Chen demonstrative D8, and just to reorient us, Dr. Chen, and this will be my final set of questions. If you recall, this is a brief that legislative defendants filed on July 6, 2017, in which they were arguing against a timeline that would lead to special elections in 2017, and instead for a longer remedial timeline. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And if again, and I apologize for the repetition, could I have you read the first sentence there and the second paragraph on page 2 of this brief?
Proceeding on that timeline will allow the General Assembly to receive public input, engage in internal discussions about the design of remedial districts, prepare draft remedial districts, receive public responses to those draft remedial districts, and incorporate public feedback into the final plans.
Dr. Chen, again, recalling that this statement was made on July 6, for the many House and Senate districts that we saw in your overlap analysis that were already fully complete or essentially fully complete by June 2017, as a logical matter, did legislative defendants subsequently, quote, engage in internal discussions about the design of those districts in some way that changed their contours?
Objection, Your Honor. He has no knowledge of the internal discussions that the legislators may or may not have had on these districts.
We're going to allow the observations that this expert made in his review of the evidence as circumstantial evidence of intent or conversation. We recognize that ultimately the fact finders will need to make a decision as to what.
Can I make one other?
Yes.
Your Honor, I don't understand how this is resolved. This could have been something you could have said earlier, that this brief could have been introduced during his direct examination. We did have testimony on it, and I don't see how this fits within any reasonable definition of rebuttal testimony.
Objections overruled. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Do you need me to repeat the question, or do you remember the question?
Would you please repeat?
Sure. For the many House and Senate districts that you testified about in direct that were already fully complete or essentially fully complete by June 2017, purely as a logical and empirical matter, did legislative defendants subsequently, quote, engage in internal discussions about the design of those districts in a way that changed the contours of them?
Logically, no. Again, I found that Dr. Hoffler had already drawn, almost completely drawn the vast majority of the districts in those draft plans that the General Assembly finally passed.
And did legislative defendants, quote, prepare remedial plans, end quote, after July 6, 2017 for those specific districts that were already complete, i.e. already prepared?
Again, logically, it would appear not.
And maybe most importantly, did legislative defendants, quote, incorporate public feedback into the final plans where all the public meetings were held, obviously after this date? Did they, quote, incorporate public feedback into the final plans for these many, many districts that were already fully complete by June 2017?
Objection, Your Honor. There's been no foundation laid in showing that Dr. Chen has any knowledge whatsoever of public feedback.
Again, we're going to allow his observation of the evidence he did review and his inferences that he testified to as circumstantial evidence of intent. We understand that the finders of fact ultimately would be responsible for making a finding on that. Go ahead, you may answer.
Logically, it doesn't appear that that happened.
Thank you. No further questions.
Yes, sir, Mr. Farr. Recross.
Dr. Chen, I want to ask you about these maps that came out today. Chen 5 and Chen 6. What mapping system was used to draw these?
I don't have them in front of me.
I thought your client or your attorney handed those up to you.
We'll get you a copy. May I approach?
Yes.
Okay, and Mr. Farr, you asked me what software I used.
Did you draw the maps?
I did. I produced these myself.
What software did you use?
I didn't use any software. I programmed some code in the R programming language.
Okay. I noticed that there's nothing on any of these exhibits about population. Is that true?
I didn't write the population numbers. I'll tell you what these are. These are census blocks. Obviously, there are a very large number of census blocks in Guilford County. I couldn't have just written in the populations of all of these census blocks into this map.
Were some of the census blocks that were moved in the city of Guilford County?
You're going to have to point me to a specific map here because we're talking about a House version and the Senate version of the Special Master District, so you're just going to have to be more specific here.
All right, let's look at the Chen D5.
And which page of D5?
Number, so maybe they are. I don't see that they are.
Well, you can just tell me page 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Well, I have my 1, 2, 3, and 4 the same as yours, so I'm looking at the first page I have that just has red and white coloring on it.
Okay.
And tell me again what that map represents.
So this map just has shaded in red District 59 under the House Bill 927 plan.
Page 2, is that the way it was changed by the special master?
Yes, page 2, that's a special master's version of 59.
And what's page 3?
Page 3 is telling us about which areas were moved into 59 by the special master and which areas were moved out of 59 by the special master. And then in red, you can see the overlap areas, in other words, the areas that were not touched by the special master.
So the green is the part that was moved into it, and the pink is the part that was moved out?
Not quite. So the green is the area that was moved out of 59 by the special master. And then the pink is the area that was moved into HD 59 by the special master.
And so the green was moved out and the pink was moved in. Is that right?
The pink was moved in and the green was moved out. I think he got that right this time.
Okay, is any part of that, there's a green area in the city of Greensboro?
I don't have the municipal boundaries of Greensboro. It looks like it could be close, but I'm not in a position just sitting here without a map of Greensboro to tell you for sure.
And you did report on these maps the amount of population that was moved in or out of House District 59?
I calculated it on my computer. I obviously did not print the number on this map.
And what's the fourth page?
That fourth page there, Mr. Farr, is where I'm reporting which areas are and are not affected by the computer simulations. In other words, all the areas in red, the greater northern half of HD 59, those are areas that the computer simulated plans do not alter, don't make any alterations. And those are the areas that contain the borders that were redrawn by the special master. The areas in the south, which I've shaded in blue, those are the areas that sometimes are assigned to a district, a different district, in some of the computer simulated plans. So,
I'm sorry, Dr. Chen.
I just meant to summarize by saying that the whole point here is to show that the blue areas are all in the south of HD 59 and are not touching any of the borders that the special master actually redrew.
All right. In this report, you did not make any comparisons between the amount of population that you moved out, that your simulated plan moved out of HD 59.
No, I was just looking at the geographic areas there. So this is just a map of the geography, it's not a map of population.
What sort of backup do you have for this exhibit?
I just produced computer code on my own laptop.
Do you have a shapefile?
I started with a shapefile, so there would have been two shapefiles that were publicly available. So one would be the special master redrawn district versions, which would have included this HD 59, and then the other shapefile that I compared this to would have been the HB 927 shapefile. So basically, the two, let me just be a little bit more specific about what those two shapefiles are. One is the HB 927 shapefile, and I turned that shapefile over in connection with my June the 8th report. And then the other shapefile was the one that contains the special master drawn versions of HD 59, and obviously that is a shapefile. That's basically what I've been calling the 2017 enacted House Plan. And obviously that's a shapefile that I relied upon for my original expert report back in April, so I certainly turned that shapefile over.
So Dr. Chen, you just having the disadvantage on all this computer stuff. The question I would like to ask is, do you have shapefiles for the maps that are reflected by Chen Exhibit 5?
Yeah, and that's what I was just describing. I drew these maps from two different shapefiles. And again, you got two different shapefiles because one is the special master's redrawing of the District 59, and then the other is going to be the House Bill 927 version. And I was just telling you, those are the two shapefiles. The House Bill 927 shapefile, as you know, I analyzed in my June 8th report from a month ago, and so of course I turned over that shapefile in connection with that June 8th report. And of course the current enacted House Plan I turned over a long time ago with my April, I forget which date, April 8th or whatever day it was, report in this case.
Okay, do you have a shape file for this particular map that we're looking at on Chen Exhibit 5?
Yeah, that's exactly what I've been talking about.
Okay.
I mean, those are literally the shape files that I use to produce this PDF.
Do you have any electronic backup for these maps?
I have computer code.
Do you have anything in your computer code that allowed you to evaluate the amount of population?
Yeah, I think I had code that basically calculated that amount of population, the number of census blocks. I mean, in fact, I know I did because I actually can see here, I kind of forgot about this, but I actually wrote on the first and second pages the actual population of District 59 under the House Bill 927 plan, as well as the number of census blocks. And of course, I did the same on page 2 for the special master's version of House District 59. So clearly, I was looking at that in the computer code, or I have computer code that calculated that.
Is there any other electronic manipulable data that you have for this map?
No, it's just a PDF, and it's produced by computer code. It's our computer code.
All right, let's talk about Chen Exhibit 2, or 6, please.
D6?
D6, yeah.
Yes, sir.
So let's just walk through these. The first page is the way the special master through the district.
No, then the first page, and I realize you may have this out of order, but I'll just orient you. The first page should read District 27 under SB 691.
That's my mistake, because I recognize that district, Dr. Chen, so I apologize for that.
Okay, and so obviously you know that that is, it's not the Special Masters version, it's the General Assembly's version from August.
I got you. What's the second page?
So that's going to be the Special Masters version, and so the red there is District 27 as drawn by the Special Master.
Okay. And then what's the third page?
This third page is basically comparing SD 27 from the Special Masters version to the SB 691 version. And so, like I testified a couple moments ago, I've shaded the different areas showing which areas were moved into or moved out of 27 by the Special Master and which areas were untouched by the Special Master.
So the pink area is the part that he moved in, the green's what he moved out.
You got it right this time.
And what is the page 4?
So it's similar to the other page 4 that we looked at. What I've shaded in other words, the non-white areas, what's shaded in is SD 27. Now, I've shaded in part of it as blue. Those are the areas in SD 27 that are sometimes assigned to the Randolph-based simulated district in some of the computer simulated plans. And so I've done that for simulation set 1 as well as for set 2. But basically those blue areas down there, those are the areas where the computer simulations actually affect the district. In other words, it's not affecting the district's areas that were actually altered by the Special Master.
So, Dr. Chen, just so I understand this, the blue area that's at the bottom of this page, we're looking at page 4, if we had the full map out, that line at the bottom of Guilford County runs along the lines of Randolph County.
Exactly. You'll find Randolph to the south of Guilford County.
Okay, the blue line that's over to the far left-hand side, that doesn't run into Randolph County, does it?
No, that's not adjacent to Randolph County. And remember, Mr. Farr, the shaded areas in this map are only the areas that are in the current version of SD 27. So when you see that lower left corner down there, that's not a portion of the current SD 27 district. So the red and the blue shading are only for areas that are in the current version of SD 27.
Then what's the difference with the fourth page? Explain that to me, please.
You want me to go to the fifth page, I think, right?
I guess it's the fifth page.
Okay, and the fifth page is basically the same thing, except now that's telling you about Senate simulation set 2 rather than set 1. And if you squint closely and look down there, you'll basically see that the blue and the red areas are pretty much the same as in the previous page.
Okay, so the red area is the area that's currently in the enacted Senate District 27?
Not quite. The blue and the red areas together are what comprise all of the current SD 27.
Okay. But the blue area also indicates the area where your simulated maps are different?
Exactly. The blue areas are the areas that are sometimes assigned to the Randolph-based district in the simulated plans. In other words, these blue areas are sometimes, not necessarily in every simulation, but in some simulations at least, are sometimes combined with whatever that district is that comprises all of Randolph County. And of course, we all know that Randolph County will always be kept together in a single district, in a single Senate district because of the whole county rule.
So under the whole county rule, Randolph County is an example of a county with a map chart that had no discretion other than to put it into a whole, in a district by itself. Is that right?
Well, you're not quite right there. I mean, you got the right idea, but the map drawer still has discretion about which portion, which fragment of Guilford County to combine with Randolph County. That's where the map drawer has discretion.
Well, I don't think that was my question. My question was, Randolph County is one of the counties that in the Senate plan would have to be wholly included into a Senate district without regard to what other county it's attached to.
Sure, it's got to be placed into a Senate district. The map drawer has discretion about which Senate district to place it into.
But the map drawer has no discretion not to wholly put Randolph County in the Senate district.
Well, I mean, obviously, the map drawer can't split Randolph County, but the map drawer still got discretion about which portion of Guilford to combine it with.
Okay. And do you have the same sort of electronic backup for Chen 6 that you have for Chen 5?
Yes, I do.
Your Honor, we would make a request that that information be produced.
Objection.
No objection.
Be allowed.
Your Honor, I just want to clarify, make sure I understand what the information is that's being produced. Dr. Chen testified that the maps were essentially generated from shape files that had already turned over, but Dr. Chen, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the way that these maps were generated is you have the shape file that's the baseline North Carolina geographic information, which he used through R to essentially generate the set of parameters on the geographic information that resulted in the output of the map. And I think what we're asking for is not just the shapefile itself, but all of the R code that was essentially new code that was developed by Dr. Chen in connection with the creation of these maps. So I just want to make sure that was, Dr. Chen, is that an accurate understanding of how the maps were developed?
Your Honor, should I respond?
Will allow.
I'm sorry.
We want to make sure that we have an accurate description of what it is that the expert is required to disclose. So, Ms. Jacobson.
I'm happy to just simplify this. We're happy to turn over. So, Mr. Branch is correct. My understanding is that Dr. Chen just took the shape files and ran some code to produce this PDF just to create a demonstrative image. We're happy to turn over the code that was used to make the PDFs. I think that's the full amount of information that was used to make this demonstrative.
That's what
Will be provided then.
And Dr. Chen, the R code you used to draw Chen 5 and 6 was something that you created after you prepared your rebuttal report.
It was after you deposed me.
All right. Your Honor, could I ask that we have some sort of deadline on when we'll receive this information? Because we don't have a lot of time. We ask the plaintiffs when the date of reason will get this done.
Is this something that could be produced by tomorrow?
Can I concur with this? Or?
I'd be happy to do so, Your Honor.
we'll have about tomorrow morning.
All right, thank you. Dr. Chen gave some opinions about the Supreme Court race involving Justice Earls. And what I wanted to ask you about is, have you ever conducted any studies of races where there were 3 candidates to actually estimate how the vote would have split if one of the candidates had run?
Well, I have studied lots of statewide elections, and occasionally some of those statewide elections include 3 candidates, 3 major candidates. Sometimes 2 of those candidates are associated with a single party. And so I've certainly looked at a lot of those election results. And while I haven't written an academic paper specifically on the topic, I've seen enough of that in my expertise, in my experience as a political science professor, that of course I know that here's what normally happens when you have a third candidate, especially one who's associated with one of the 2 major parties. So it's something that I've seen in a lot of my experience as a political scientist.
I don't think that was the question I'm going to ask. The question I asked is, have you ever taken a race where there were 3 candidates and then done a study of that race to determine where the voters would have gone if one of those candidates had not been in the election?
I've just observed the outcomes of those elections. I don't know that I've done a specific academic study just focusing on that question.
So you've never taken a race and attempted to test or do empirical analysis of how many voters would vote for candidate 1 or candidate 2 if candidate 3 had not been in the race?
Well, that's not something that's not something that you can actually study, because you're asking a counterfactual. You're asking, what if this election had occurred without that third candidate? That's not what happens in reality. So that's not something that you can specifically look at some election results for. Like I said, this is a situation I've come across quite frequently in my studies of elections and election results as a political scientist.
If it's a counterfactual and something you can't study, how can you sit here today and offer an opinion on how many voters would vote for Justice Earls and how many would vote for the other candidate?
Mr. Farr, I did not offer such an opinion. Earlier, Mr. Jacobson asked me, would it be reasonable to assume that 100% of Mr. Anglin's votes would go to, say, the Democrat versus the Republican? And I said, well, yeah, of course not. You can't say 100%. That's just a logical matter. When you have a third candidate, that third candidate doesn't take votes exclusively from one party or another party. That's just something that we logically know from following elections. And then Mr. Jacobson asked me to accept the hypothetical of 80% or 20%. I did the math calculations.
Any of the elections that you have studied, do they involve 2 Republicans running against 1 Democrat, or were they elections with a Republican and a Democrat and someone from another party?
Well, very commonly, it's something like 2 Republicans or 2 Democrats, except, more commonly, it's the sort of situation where the second Republican didn't technically run as a Republican. The candidate was just somebody who used to be a Republican, was associated with the Republican Party, but ran as an independent. That's what we very commonly see. That's something that you often see in statewide. It's not often, but sometimes you occasionally see that in statewide races.
So other than this 2018 Supreme Court race, can you think of any other race that you've looked at where there were 3 candidates and 2 of them were Republicans and 1 was a Democrat?
Well, I mean, same answer as before. No, I can't, but that's just because in most states, this sort of situation could not happen, where the Republican Party in a lot of states would be able to exert enough control to prevent a second Republican from running. And then what would usually happen in such a situation is that second Republican candidate would just say, okay, fine, I'm going to run as an independent. That's what usually happens. But it's fundamentally the same sort of situation as what we see here.
Just so I understand the answer, you've never looked at a race where there were 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat running?
Again, that is correct, because that is not something that commonly happens in a lot of other states.
What data or evidence are you aware of to form any opinions on the knowledge of the voters in North Carolina concerning the 3 candidates who ran for Supreme Court in 2018?
Well, of course I didn't study voters with respect to this specific election. The only thing I offered an opinion about a couple moments ago in response to Mr. Jacobson's question was simply that it's never reasonable to assume that a third candidate is taking votes exclusively from one party and not from the other party. In other words, that the breakdown would be 100% from the Democratic Party and 0% for the other party. That's what's not reasonable. That's just a logical matter. We know that that's not how voters are perfectly coordinated along party lines.
But you've never done any studies to conclude what percentage of the voters would vote for candidate 1 or candidate 2?
No, I didn't, and I was not offering opinions along those lines.
When you, Plaintiffs' Counsel asked you some questions about, and I'm sorry, I don't think I'm going to phrase these correctly, so if I miss them, please correct me. But basically, he asked you questions about the time frame between, I guess, the Covington opinion and maybe there was a different deadline and the enactment of the plan. And you were looking at a brief that we filed, and you said logically there would not have been any time for the legislature to have internal discussions about the maps. Do you remember that testimony?
Yes, I do.
Have you ever talked to any of the legislators to see if there were any internal discussions about the maps?
No, and my opinion that I gave in response to Mr. Jacobson's question was just based on some logical reasoning, given the dates that I know from those Dr. Hoffler draft maps. That was the basis of my opinion. I was just giving you a logical reasoning.
I'm very careful, at least I try to be, when I make representations to the court about things that I think I'm aware of. And I would like to put up on the screen an opinion that we just got off the internet in the Covington case. Could someone do that, please? Can you see, Your Honor, that's a procuring decision in the Covington case?
Yes.
Can we see it?
Is this a question for me?
No, I'm asking, this is to the court. I mean, I want to correct the statement that I made and also the representation was made about me during the redirect.
We can see your exhibit.
Yes, sir. So, Your Honor, you'll see that that opinion is a procuring opinion, and it's dated June 28, 2018. I just want the court to know that that was the document that I was referring to that I found on the internet 2 nights ago, and it was not my intent to misrepresent to the court about the date of the Covington opinion, because that was insinuated by anybody in this trial. So I wanted you to know what I had relied upon.
I can assure you the court does not believe that you misrepresented the date of the opinion to the court. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate that. Your Honor, we have no other questions, but Mr. Branch may have questions.
Mr. Branch.
Dr. Chen, when did you compare the code in R that resulted in the output of demonstrative exhibits Chen D5 and Chen D6?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I caught your question.
When did you compare the code in R that resulted in the output of demonstrative exhibit Chen D5?
I'm not sure I could tell you the exact date, but I can tell you, I believe it was within the last 2 weeks.
Was it prior to the beginning date of this trial?
It was.
And the same question with regard to Chen D6. When did you compare the code in R that resulted in the maps that comprised demonstrative exhibit Chen D6?
Same answer.
Your Honor, on the basis of this, I'm going to again move to strike exhibits Chen D6 and Chen D5. The reason is this: the code that Dr. Chen has prepared in R, it's not an object, it's not just a line of code on a computer screen, it's an analysis. He made decisions with regard to what information to put in these 2 demonstrative exhibits that were not disclosed in his expert report. Rule 26 requires that all opinions of an expert witness must be disclosed in their expert report. What's happened here is Mr. Farr elicited testimony where Dr. Chen had to admit the special master drawn plans had been drawn by the special master, had been locked in for purposes of the drawing of the 2017 plans, and that the legislature didn't have any discretion to do anything with those lines. In order to combat that, in between his deposition and trial, plans to produce these new maps containing new analysis and new details. And Judge, I just don't believe that, in all fairness, our experts have never seen them. They've never had any opportunity to conduct an analysis of them. We're not going to get to cross them about computer code. They should not be in front of the board. And so I understand they've only been included as demonstrative exhibits, but we believe that they should be struck. If the court's not inclined to strike them, at the very least, defendant's experts should be allowed to testify as to the code and what their opinions are of them. And Judge, I think the entirety of this back and forth over these demonstrative exhibits, all of the time that we're spending on this ought to be allocated to the plaintiffs, given the timing constraints that we're under as things are. So.
And just so that I understand these maps, and I think in a very high level understanding, as I understand what these maps demonstrate is areas of Guilford County and surrounding counties that were redrawn by the special master in connection with the Covington case, and therefore were therefore frozen by this expert in his simulations of data sets relating to those areas of this same county grouping in which the General Assembly had discretion to draw maps. Is that a high-level understanding of what these maps represent?
Your Honor, that's what's been represented to the court. The challenge from at least our perspective is this wasn't included in the expert report, so there's no way for it to pass.
We understand that. So if there is dispute about these maps, it is whether they accurately reflect the maps that the special master ordered back in 2017. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes.
All right, so we're talking about a boundary that's been in place, a geographical boundary that's been in place for some time, and the question is, did he accurately represent that boundary on these maps?
I would contend, Judge, that's one question. Another question might be, what is within the lines that changed with respect to those boundaries? We don't have that information because these maps were never disclosed to us. We haven't had a chance to do that analysis. We're certainly never going to get to ask Dr. Chen any questions about it.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by what has changed.
For example, Judge, if we look at Chen D5, you have the green, and I apologize, mine are all out of order, so I'm not sure how to identify this report other than the Chen D5 map that has the green cutout on. Yes. So, for example, Dr. Barr, intervener defendant's expert, one of the things he's going to testify to is population density and how population density can affect the drawing of district maps and partisan composition. We don't know what the population density is. We don't know what the partisan makeup is of the different sections of this map. And so,
is there dispute that the green area and the pink area were areas that the special master created?
I have no way to dispute that at this point, Judge.
So again, it's really the question whether these accurately reflect what the special master did in response to the Covington Court's directions.
And I understand that that's what the maps are attempting to represent. Yes, sir.
Yes.
May I offer something that's
Yes.
potentially helpful? Legislative defendants, one of their exhibits is the actual special master's report. This was tab 5 in the binder that handed out yesterday. It's legislative defendants exhibit 159.
Yes.
If you look, for instance, at page 29. The map on the middle there is the enacted plan, and the map on the right is the special master's version. All these charts are doing is essentially providing colors that help you illustrate what you could see by just looking at it, but in a way that I think is much easier to comprehend than trying to, in your mind, superimpose the map on the right over the map on the left. I mean, certainly if they find errors in the shading of green and pink, we will correct these demonstratives, but that's all that these demonstratives are doing.
Yeah. We overrule the objection that you have made to the introduction of these maps or the striking of these maps, and we stand by our original decision with respect to these demonstrative exhibits which have been allowed simply for the purposes of illustration.
Your Honor, what about the request that defendant's experts be allowed to testify with regard to these demonstrative exhibits, given plaintiff's objections prior to new opinions coming in?
Right. Again, they're received for the purposes of demonstrating the actual boundaries that were created by the special masters. If there are errors found in that, then that would be the sort of thing that certainly would be subject to cross-examination, or cross-examination and information received from other witnesses about what the actual boundaries are. There's information that this witness did not testify, that you've referenced, things like population densities and things of that sort. He did not purport to analyze that or offer opinions about the composition of these areas.
The only caveat I'd offer to that, Judge, is he did, there's census block data contained on these maps, and he did testify that he was looking at population information and drawings. So, but I understand the court's rule and I appreciate it.
All right, thank you, sir.
I ask for clarification, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
I apologize. I heard you say that these were admissible to show the location of the special master districts. Is that the only reason they're being admitted? Or are they also being admitted to show the changes in the special master districts that were made by Dr. Chen's simulated plans? And, Your Honor, I would say the first part, we can examine that and see if these maps represent what the special master did. But the second part, when we get into what his simulated maps do to change the population, it's a horse of an entirely different color. And why should our experts, who we're trying to get ready to testify, now have to go at this last moment to go back and study his R code so we can figure out if he's properly reflected in these maps the areas that he switched out from the special masters districts with the simulated maps. That's not like a simple task to perform at this point in time.
Has there been no testimony previously in deposition or reports that Dr. Chen froze areas of the enacted map, and specifically those areas that were drawn by the special master? I believe I've heard that testimony.
But there's been no testimony about here's all the areas that his simulated map may have switched out for the special master. That's not been disclosed before.
All right. I think we'll just have to take up the testimony and the objections as it comes along. I think we understand what the purpose of these exhibits illustrated. It seemed to be a fairly straightforward concept, but we have spent a lot of time talking about it. The code will be produced to you. If you believe that the code illustrates something that needs to be addressed by your experts, you can raise that issue, argue that issue at such time as you intend to offer it.
And Your Honor, thank you for taking the time to listen to our arguments. I know this is a complicated question, and we understand the court's ruling.
Yes, sir. All right, and I may have misspoken. I don't believe these have been admitted into evidence. They've been provided as demonstrative exhibits that were used by the expert during his testimony. If they are not admitted into evidence, we may need to mark them as court's exhibits for the purposes of preserving the record, but we'll do so. All right. So as I understand it, are there any further questions? I think I've asked Mr. Branch and Mr. Cox anything further. All right. So you may step down, sir. Are there matters you wish to have admitted at this point, or have we done all of that?
We've done all that. Thank you.
All right, we did that at the conclusion of the direct examination. All right, further evidence for the plaintiffs.
Yeah, our next witness is Joshua Brown. He's a plaintiff, and my colleague John Robinson will be putting on his direct testimony.
I can tell you that we need to recess in about 20 minutes. We'll take the normal 1.5 hour break, but I apologize if that.
That will be good time for us.
All right, very good.
Please remain standing. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And this is your solemn affirmation. Thank you. You may be seated.
Good afternoon, Mr. Brown. Could you please state your full name for the record?
My name is Joshua Perry Brown.
Where do you live?
I live in High Point, North Carolina. My address is 826 East Lexington Avenue, High Point, North Carolina, where the zip code is 27262. High Point. The zip code is 27262. Sorry.
How long have you lived at that address?
About 10 years.
You said you live in High Point. Could you tell the court a little bit about the High Point area?
High Point is the second largest city in Guilford County. It's known as the furniture capital of the world because they used to manufacture a lot of the furniture we use there. Now they're known as that because they have the International Home Furnishings Market there twice a year, where wholesalers and retailers meet to sell each other furniture.
What do you do for a living?
I've been a locksmith apprentice off and on the past few years in between injuries, and until this injury last year, I was working with Vue Custom Construction, that is spelled VUE, Custom Construction Incorporated, helping to build and maintain pools.
Mr. Brown, are you registered with a political party?
Yes, I've been a registered Democrat for as long as I've been registered to vote.
How often do you vote?
Really often. I voted in every presidential election since I've been registered. Many of the other elections in between that time and now, and then starting in 2016, I became a regular primary voter and a regular voter in the smallest municipal elections as well.
Why do you make it a point to vote so regularly?
It's literally our only opportunity to change our leadership, who in turn set the policy and the law that affects so much of our life.
Have you been involved in Democratic politics in the state of North Carolina?
Yes, I've served in a number of positions volunteering with the Democratic Party.
Please tell the court a little bit about those.
I have served as former chair of my precinct, Democratic chair of my precinct, that's H12. Currently vice chair of that precinct. I'm a former county vice chair for the Guilford County Democratic Party. I'm still serving on the state executive committee for the North Carolina Democratic Party. I serve on the State Council of Review, representing the 13th Congressional District for the state party, and on the State Judicial Board of the Progressive Caucus of the North Carolina Democratic Party, where this year I became the chairman.
Are any of those positions paid?
None of them pay a dime.
Why do you volunteer so much of your time to those Democratic organizations?
In addition to voting, it's really, it expands on what I do by voting, because I get other people to vote. I help make sure it's possible for them to do so, even helping to recruit poll observers when I was a county vice chair to watch the vote and make sure it was honestly carried out.
Okay. Now I'd like to talk about your state Senate and House districts. Do you know which state Senate district number you're in?
State Senate?
Yes.
26 currently.
Do you know who your state senator is?
Jerry Tillman.
What is Mr. Tillman's political party?
He's a Republican.
Did you vote for Mr. Tillman?
I did not.
For whom did you vote in 2018?
I voted for William McCaskill.
Are you familiar with the current makeup and boundaries of Senate District 26 generally?
Generally, yes.
So I'd like to show the witness, for demonstrative purposes only, Plaintiff's Exhibit 281. Mr. Brown, what are we looking at here?
We are looking at the state Senate districts, including my area and surrounding counties.
And could you identify on the screen where approximately in Senate District 26 you live?
Do I just touch the screen to?
Yes.
Thank you. Roughly in this area.
Mr. Brown, can you think of any reason other than gerrymandering why the border of Senate District 26 that goes around the city of High Point there would be drawn in that way?
No, we are not following municipal lines. There are no rivers, no mountains, no other logical reason to explain that particular line.
And I see that by drawing the line in that way, you're combined with Randolph County to the south. Do you consider Randolph County to be part of your community?
No, we're very distinctive culturally.
You mentioned that Jerry Tillman won this district in 2018. Do you know what percentage of the vote Mr. Tillman won with?
I believe that was close to 2/3. That would be over 60%.
Thank you. We can take down this exhibit. And I'd now like to talk about your House district, Mr. Brown. In which state House district do you live?
I live in State House District 60.
Do you know who your state House representative is?
Cecil Antonio Brockman.
What is Mr. Brockman's political party?
He's a Democrat.
Did you vote for Mr. Brockman?
Yes, I did.
Are you familiar with the current makeup and boundaries of House District 60?
Yes, roughly.
So I'd like to show the witness, for demonstrative purposes, Plaintiff's Exhibit 310. Mr. Brown, what is this?
This is a map of our state House districts, including my area and parts of Guilford County.
And could you identify again, generally, where you live in House District 60?
I'm somewhere in this area here.
Thank you. And you mentioned that Mr. Brockman won this district in 2018. Do you know approximately what percentage of the vote Mr. Brockman won with?
That's over 60%, approximately about 2/3 again.
Great, we can take down this exhibit. So we just spoke about your state Senate and state House districts. Do you believe that the way those districts are drawn has affected your ability to participate in the political process?
Yes, significantly.
And let's take your state Senate district first. Why do you believe that the way that district is drawn has affected your ability to participate in the political process?
We've been added to a highly conservative area, and not even my whole city, in a way that clearly dilutes the ability of Democrats to even attempt to run a fair race.
And what about your state House district? How has that affected your ability to participate politically in the state of North Carolina?
We've pulled together all the Democrats from surrounding districts into that one so that we reduce the odds of any surrounding districts electing a Democrat.
Are there issues that are currently before the North Carolina General Assembly that you care about?
Several, including living wage, Medicaid expansion, and environmental laws, just as a few examples.
Why do you care about those issues specifically?
Each of those has a very personal effect in my life. For example, a living wage would make it easier for me to eat a little better and be able to start paying my student loans back, hopefully. Air quality is a personal issue for me because I have biapical lung scarring, so I'm very vulnerable to bad air quality. And then Medicaid expansion has a significant effect on my family. My mother was just in the hospital a couple weeks ago. She was taken in unconscious, just got out this week. And her health has been significantly affected the past few years. She would not be facing certain health issues if we had accepted Medicaid expansion years ago after passing the Affordable Care Act. So, I'm sorry, the Affordable Care Act, it would have made a huge difference. There was an injury specifically a few years back when she did not have coverage that has healed incorrectly and is a permanent problem. Doctors have discussed amputation for that foot. And now she is going through chemotherapy and radiation, and in the midst of starting that has discussed bankruptcy because of the effect it has in our life.
Mr. Brown, do you believe that the Republican Party in the General Assembly today has the same stances on those issues as you do?
No, in fact, they have the opposing ones.
Mr. Brown, do you believe that you are entitled to have a representative of your choice represent you in the General Assembly?
No, not my personal choice. I believe we deserve a fair system where, as a collective of voters, we have a fair chance to elect our best representative.
And I know you've taken a lot of time to be here, Mr. Brown, from High Point. In fact, it's today the first day that you've been attending this trial.
I've been here all week.
So why is this issue of partisan gerrymandering so important to you, Mr. Brown?
It affects our ability to elect representatives who speak to our needs, as opposed to predetermining the results of so many of these elections that our representatives, frankly from both parties, are not held to the highest standard possible for lack of competition.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Cross-examination for the legislative defendants.
Yes, sir. Could we pass out a couple of exhibit binders?
Yes, ma'am.
TY.
Ms. Brown?
Good afternoon, Mr. Brown.
Good
We met
afternoon.
at your deposition, but my name is Erica Prouty. I'm with the law firm Baker Hostetler, and I represent the legislative defendants in this case. Let me first say I'm sorry to hear about your injury, and I wish you a speedy recovery.
Thank you.
You consider yourself to be very involved with the Guilford County Democratic Party, correct?
Yes,
And you became involved with the Guilford County Democratic Party within the last few years. Is that right?
most significantly involved with them, yes.
And since 2017, you've served in several officer roles with the Guilford County Democratic Party, correct?
Actually, I started with certain roles in 2016, including being a delegate, for example.
But since 2017, you have been able to continue serving in those roles, correct?
When elected to do so.
And in 2017, 2018, 2019, you've served as a delegate at various Democratic conventions, correct?
That is correct.
And in 2017 and 2018, you volunteered on behalf of the Guilford County Democratic Party, correct?
I believe once we're elected, we're kind of constantly volunteering for them.
Sure. And in those years, you also recruited volunteers for the county party, correct?
Yes, including rides to the polls, poll observers, etc.
And in 2017 and 2018, you did phone banking in your precinct to get out the vote.
Some. That's usually other people, but I helped get people together for it at least.
And you're aware that the redistricting process for state legislative districts is done by the legislature, correct?
Yes.
And during the 2017 redistricting process for those state legislative districts, you never contacted anyone at the legislature about how you wanted your districts to look, correct?
Not while I was dealing with all the medical issues I've had over the past few years, no.
And you never attended any public hearings regarding the 2017 legislative redistricting process, correct?
Transporting myself while on crutches was difficult, so no, I did not.
Let's talk about your legislative districts. So I think you've testified that you live in Guilford County, correct?
That is correct.
And High Point is in the southwest corner of Guilford County, is that right?
That is correct.
Can we pull up Legislative Defendants Trial Exhibit 183? It'll be in the first document in your binder, and it should
Thank you,
also
ma'am.
be on the screen. So this map shows Guilford County, correct?
It is centered on Guilford County, yes, ma'am.
And this map shows 6 House districts in Guilford County, correct?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yes, ma'am.
So, and those are 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, and 62.
That is correct.
And the blue marker in the lower left-hand corner shows where you live in House District 60. Is that right?
Yes, it appears to be true, although I can't see street names. I will accept your representation. That is accurate.
And on the western and northern borders of your district is House District 62. Is that right?
That is correct.
And part of High Point is in House District 62. Is that right?
That is correct.
And you don't like that part of that you don't like that part of High Point is in House District 62. Is that correct?
Actually, the issue is not what number we're under, but how many ways my city is divided.
There's been a lot of testimony here today about the special master and the Covington lawsuit. And you're aware that districts 57, 61, and 62 were redrawn by the special master in that case.
Extensively after the discussion during this trial, yes, ma'am.
And those districts 57, 61, and 62 are not being challenged in this case.
No, I'm only worried about the one I live in, quite frankly.
Can we pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 310? It should be the second document in your binder. And this map shows House Districts 58, 59, and 60, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you see that some of the areas displayed on this map are grayed out, correct?
Other areas being grayed out, yes, ma'am.
And those areas contain districts 57, 61, and 62.
And other surrounding legislative districts, yes, ma'am.
So the western and northern borders of your district, House District 60, are locked in by the special master's redrawn District 62.
Objection, Your Honor, to the extent we're asking a lay witness to opine as to a legal issue.
He can testify as to his personal understanding, but
It's accepted solely for that purpose, so if you have an understanding of that, you may testify.
I'll be very honest, I am not a professional like some of the experts we've heard from, so I don't know the detail to which those borders are locked by the court decision.
And let's talk about your Senate district here. And so Guilford County is grouped together with Alamance and Randolph counties, correct?
That is correct.
Let's put up Legislative Defendants Trial Exhibit 184. And so this is a map showing Guilford, Randolph, and Alamance counties, correct?
Centered on our area, but showing that and more than that, yes, ma'am.
And the Senate districts within these counties are districts 24, 26, 27, and 28, correct?
Yes.
And the blue marker in the middle of the page is about where you live in Senate District 26. Is that right?
And to be clear, without street names, I can only accept your representation, but I do accept your representation. That is accurate.
And a portion of High Point is in District 27 on this map. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And are you aware that Districts 24, 27, and 28 were changed by the special master in the Covington litigation?
I'm aware that they did change in 2017.
Can we put up Plaintiff Exhibit 281, please? And this map shows, again, Senate Districts 24, 26, 27, and 28. Is that right?
And 24 as well, yes, ma'am.
And so you don't like that High Point is divided across multiple Senate districts. Is that right?
No, I don't believe we have such a large population in High Point that we need to be divided into so many districts.
You would prefer High Point to be in one Senate district then, is that correct?
Yes, that would seem more sensible according to traditional ways of drawing maps where we include whole cities, whole counties, and follow those sort of logical lines.
And you believe that the northeastern, southeastern, and western portions of High Point that are not in Senate District 26 should be with the rest of High Point, is that right?
Large portions of them. I do understand that we extend outside our county, but I would prefer that we at least either follow a municipal or a county line.
Okay, and so those areas of High Point that are not in Senate District 26 are in Senate District 27, is that right?
Some of them.
And Senate District 27 was changed by the special master in the Covington litigation, is that right?
I'm aware of that, yes, ma'am.
And Senate District 26 is also bordered by Senate District 24, is that right?
Yes, it does appear to be.
And would you agree with me that some counties have to be grouped together in order to achieve equal population of districts?
Yes, counties do have to be grouped together in order to achieve the population targets we seek.
And Randolph County needs to be combined with a portion of another county for purposes of equal population, is that correct?
One of the surrounding counties, yes, ma'am.
But you don't believe that that county should be Guilford County?
I don't believe it has to be Guilford County. I believe we do potentially have options, although as I'm not a professional map maker, I couldn't determine which direction or how far to go into another county.
You don't know whether the decision to group Guilford, Alamance, and Randolph counties together is being challenged in this litigation, do you?
Guilford, Randolph, Alamance.
Is being challenged in this litigation.
I don't know the details of that part of the challenge, no, ma'am.
But Randolph County is bordered by Senate District 27, correct?
Part of Randolph County is bordered by 27, yes, ma'am.
And it's also bordered by Senate District 24.
Part of Randolph County is also bordered by 24, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and let's talk about your state senator, and that's Jerry Tillman, correct?
That is correct.
You've never contacted Senator Tillman on any policy issues, correct?
No, I tend to speak with Republicans who will at least give me the time of day on these issues, and having heard from Jerry Tillman, I didn't want to waste the short time I have in life trying to convince him to do things he obviously does not want to do.
You never attempted to contact his office.
After hearing how he believes, no, I didn't want to waste my time.
And you've never called your state representative or state senator on any constituent services matters, have you?
Just slow down a minute.
Yeah.
State representative.
I can repeat the question, I'm sorry.
Just call for state senator or state representative.
On any constituent services matters.
To clarify, I tend to speak to my representatives in person for a number of reasons, but no, I've not actually sought help with any constituent services from my representatives.
And are you familiar with Senator Michael Garrett?
Yes, I have met him on several occasions.
And he represents Senate District 27?
Yes, to the northwest of me.
And he's a Democrat?
Yes, he is.
And you're able to contact him to make your views known, correct?
Yes, he's much more responsive to me than Jerry Tillman.
And in House District 60, your current representative is Cecil Brockman, correct?
That is correct.
And Representative Brockman comes to your district pretty often, is that right?
Regularly, especially during election time.
And if you needed to speak with Representative Brockman, you seem enough that you could talk to him about an issue.
And I do.
And you believe he listens to your concerns.
He listens and, for the most part, does agree with what I seek in legislative policy.
So you believe that he represents your policy preferences in the legislature?
The majority of them, yes.
And you believe that he's responsive to those policy preferences?
As I'd wish every politician of every party was. Yes, ma'am.
And he's a Democrat?
Yes, he is.
And in the 2018 election, you voted for him?
Happily, yes, ma'am.
And the Democratic candidate is your candidate of choice, correct?
Until Republicans start speaking to my needs, yes, ma'am.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Branch, any questions, please?
Mr. Cox, any redirect?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, we'll be in recess until 20 minutes past 2 o'clock.